The morning sun cast long shadows across the wheat fields as Marcus Webb adjusted his designer tie and practiced his most charming smile in the rearview mirror of his rented luxury sedan. For 15 years, he'd been the best con artist in 3 states, but as he stepped into the dusty offices of Heartland Agricultural Cooperative with forged credentials and a fabricated resume, not even he could have predicted how this particular scam would transform his life forever. What he discovered behind the co-op's weather-beaten doors wasn't just creative accounting. It was systematic theft that had been bleeding hard-working farming families dry for generations. As Marcus gained access to the hidden ledgers, a strange feeling began to replace his usual detachment. Genuine rage on behalf of people he'd originally planned to exploit himself. What unexpected alliance will force Marcus to choose between the biggest score of his career and a chance at redemption he never thought possible? If this story touched your heart, comment below with your thoughts, like and subscribe to our channel, and share any similar stories of unexpected redemption you've experienced in your own life. Marcus Webb had selected Heartland Agricultural Cooperative for reasons beyond its obvious wealth. Something about the numbers didn't add up. How a rural co-op in a region of struggling farmers maintained such impressive profit margins year after year. Those discrepancies promised opportunity, and opportunity meant money. The sleepy town of Millfield greeted him with weathered storefronts and faded awnings. Its main street was lined with businesses that had clearly seen better days, except for the imposing brick building housing the Heartland Agricultural Cooperative, which stood like a fortress amidst decay. "Mr. Reynolds, welcome to Heartland." Vernon Stillwell's handshake was firm, his smile practiced. The co-op manager looked more like a banker than someone involved with agriculture. Tailored suit, manicured nails, not a speck of dirt to be found. "Pleasure to be here," Marcus replied with equal polish, using his preferred alias. "I'm eager to see how I can optimize your already impressive operation." Vernon beamed. "The board is thrilled to have someone with your financial background. Harvard Business, wasn't it? And Wharton," Marcus added smoothly. Neither was true, but his forged credentials were flawless. The tour revealed a stark contrast Marcus hadn't anticipated. While the executive offices gleamed with expensive furniture and artwork, the processing areas where farmers delivered crops were dilapidated. Scales visibly worn, clerks working on outdated equipment. "We've been meaning to upgrade the facilities," Vernon explained dismissively, "but the board prioritizes financial stability over appearances." Marcus nodded, already noting how easily a few ounces could be shaved from each weigh-in with the ancient scales. "Classic. Let me introduce you to our team." Vernon led him to a conference room where 5 people waited, the co-op's inner circle. Each greeted him with varying degrees of enthusiasm, but Marcus immediately identified the power dynamics. Melissa Reeves, the financial director, watched him with calculated assessment. Robert Klein, operations manager, seemed perpetually nervous. The others were followers, not decision-makers. "Mr. Reynolds will be helping us streamline our profit strategies," Vernon announced. "Full access to all departments." Melissa's eyes narrowed slightly. "All departments? That's unusual for a consultant." Marcus met her gaze directly. "How can I optimize what I can't fully examine? I assure you, discretion is my watchword." Vernon clapped his hands together. "It's settled then. You'll start tomorrow." As they exited the building, Marcus noticed a woman arguing with a clerk at the payment counter. Unlike most farmers he'd seen in their worn clothes and weathered skin, she carried herself with unmistakable dignity, despite her work-stained jeans and flannel shirt. "That's Sarah Daniels," Vernon muttered. "Third-generation troublemaker. Thinks the co-op doesn't pay fair prices. Doesn't she understand market fluctuations?" Marcus offered, testing the waters. Vernon snorted. "She understands plenty. Too much, if you ask me. Her family's been challenging our practices for years. Unfortunately, for her, the bank that holds her mortgage appreciates our business relationship." The implied threat wasn't subtle. Marcus watched as Sarah stormed out, her face flushed with anger. Later, settling into his rented house, modest enough not to raise eyebrows but comfortable enough to satisfy his tastes, Marcus reviewed his gear. Notes. Standard co-op operations involved collecting farmers' produce, processing and selling it at market rates, then returning profits to members after subtracting operating costs. The entire system relied on trust. Trust was always the foundation of the best cons. His laptop displayed Heartland's public financial statements alongside county records of farming foreclosures. The correlation was unmistakable. As Heartland's Profits rose. More family farms failed. A knock at the door interrupted his analysis. When he opened it, Sarah Daniels stood on his porch, arms crossed. "So you're Vernon's new numbers guy," she said without preamble. Marcus leaned against the door frame, his expression neutral. "And you're the troublemaker. Funny how asking for fair treatment makes someone a troublemaker." Her eyes, the clear blue of a summer sky, assessed him coolly. "Let me save you some time, Mr. Reynolds. This town knows what Heartland really is. We just can't prove it." "And what exactly is Heartland?" he asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. "A parasite." She handed him a folded paper. "This was my grandfather's farm. 70 years building something from nothing. Lost it in a single season after Heartland took over regional distribution. My father's fighting to keep what's left. I'm just trying to make sure my daughter still has a legacy." Before he could respond, she turned to leave. "You seem different than Vernon's usual cronies. Maybe you're just better at hiding it. Either way, people around here are watching you." Marcus watched her walk away, an unexpected tension in his chest. People like Sarah Daniels were precisely why he avoided small towns. Too personal, too many connections. They complicated what should be a simple equation. Still, he smiled as he closed the door. Her suspicion would make his performance all the more convincing when he positioned himself as the farmer's unexpected champion, right? Before he disappeared with enough money to retire permanently. This con was going to be his masterpiece. Marcus arrived at the co-op early the next morning. He preferred to observe people's natural routines before they realized they were being watched. The janitor barely glanced at his consultant's badge as he made his way to the records room. "Good morning," called a voice as he entered. An elderly woman looked up from behind a desk stacked with ledgers. Her silver hair was pinned in a neat bun, and reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck. "You must be Mr. Reynolds. I'm Ellen Porter, head bookkeeper. The pleasure's mine," Marcus replied with practiced charm. "I hope you don't mind. My early start." "Mind? Heavens no. It's refreshing to see someone eager to understand our operations." She gestured to the filing cabinets lining the walls. 38 years I've kept these records. Ask me anything." Marcus hadn't expected such an asset on his first day. "I'd love to review the payment structures for member farmers over the past 5 years, if that's possible." "Of course." Ellen retrieved several binders with surprising agility for her age. "You'll find our official statements here." "Anything specific you're looking for?" "Just patterns," Marcus said vaguely. Vernon mentioned optimizing profit distribution. Ellen's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I see." For the next 3 hours, Marcus pored over the official records, noting discrepancies between reported crop values and payments to farmers. The differences were subtle, a percentage point here, a rounding error there, but they accumulated to substantial amounts over time. "Ms. Porter, these quarterly returns to farmers seem lower than market averages," he remarked casually. Ellen glanced toward the door before responding quietly. "Market fluctuations and processing costs affect final payments. That's the official explanation." The emphasis on official wasn't lost on Marcus. "And the unofficial explanation?" She busied herself reorganizing papers. "I wouldn't know about that, Mr. Reynolds." At noon, Vernon appeared, inviting Marcus to lunch with several board members. Over expensive steaks at the town's only upscale restaurant, they discussed modernization strategies while carefully avoiding specifics. "You understand," said board chairman William Harris, swirling his scotch, "that certain operational details require flexibility." Marcus nodded knowingly. "Flexibility is the cornerstone of profitable business." The men exchanged satisfied glances. They believed they'd found a kindred spirit. After lunch, Vernon granted Marcus access to the digital financial system with his own login credentials, a careless move that told Marcus exactly how secure Vernon felt in his position. Alone in a small office, Marcus began cross-referencing the digital records with the physical ledgers. The discrepancies were immediately apparent and far more extensive than he'd initially suspected. Heartland wasn't just skimming profits. They were systematically falsifying weight measurements, manipulating crop quality assessments, and charging excessive processing fees that didn't correspond to actual costs. More disturbing were the evidence of collusion with local banks. Loans to farmers carried exorbitant interest rates, with repayment terms tied to co-op payment schedules that seemed designed to create defaults. Marcus let out a low whistle. This wasn't just a scam. It was institutional theft spanning decades. His original plan had been straightforward. Identify weaknesses in the co-op's financial controls, Create a fictitious investment opportunity requiring liquid capital. Convince the board to transfer funds to his offshore accounts and disappear. Standard con, larger scale. But what he'd discovered changed the equation. The co-op's legitimate annual profit was nearly triple what they reported to members. The potential score was far bigger than he'd anticipated, possibly his largest ever. Yet, something else nagged at him. The sheer predatory nature of the operation. The calculated destruction of families like Sarah's felt different from his usual targets, wealthy individuals or corporations whose greed made them vulnerable. Finding everything you need? Vernon appeared in the doorway, startling Marcus. Absolutely, Marcus recovered smoothly. Your operation is impressive. Vernon closed the door. Between us, Reynolds, I think you understand what we're really doing here. Maximizing profit through creative accounting, Marcus offered. Vernon laughed. That's a polite way of putting it. Look, farming is a dying industry. These people are living on borrowed time. We're just accelerating the inevitable while ensuring the right people benefit. The right people being smart people. People who understand how the world really works. Vernon's expression hardened. Not sentimental fools clinging to family legacies and traditions. Marcus thought of Sarah's defiant stance, her determination to preserve something beyond mere profit. He suppressed the unexpected flare of anger. I think I can help you make this operation even more efficient, Marcus said, maintaining his cover. That's what I hoped you'd say. Vernon clapped him on the shoulder. There's a board meeting. Friday. Prepare some preliminary findings. Nothing too specific, just enough to justify your continued consultation. After Vernon left, Marcus continued his investigation with growing disbelief. Farms that had been in families for generations were being systematically stripped away through manipulated crop prices and predatory lending. Meanwhile, Vernon and the board were purchasing foreclosed properties through shell companies at fractions of their value. As darkness fell outside the window, Marcus found himself doing something unusual, taking meticulous notes not for his con, but documenting the co-op's fraud, evidence that could potentially expose the entire operation. The revelation surprised him. When had he started caring about justice? As he prepared to leave, he discovered a folder labeled Acquisition Targets, containing assessments of financially vulnerable farms, including Sarah Daniels' property. Notations indicated plans to force foreclosure within 6 months. Standing in the empty office, Marcus faced an unexpected moral dilemma. He'd come to con the co-op, not save it. He'd planned to steal from thieves, a victimless crime in his ethical framework. But now, holding evidence of systematic destruction of people's lives and livelihoods, Marcus felt something he rarely experienced in his work: genuine moral outrage. The next morning, Marcus arrived with 2 cups of coffee, one for himself and one for Ellen Porter. The bookkeeper's surprise at the gesture was evident in her momentary speechlessness. Black with 1 sugar, right? I noticed yesterday, Marcus explained, setting the cup on her desk. Ellen's weathered face softened. How thoughtful. No one's brought me coffee in years. Marcus settled into a chair beside her desk. I was hoping you might help me understand some historical context. Trends are more revealing when you know the story behind the numbers. It was a calculated move. In his experience, longtime employees often held the keys to understanding an organization's vulnerabilities, especially those who felt undervalued or overlooked. What would you like to know? Ellen asked, sipping her coffee appreciatively. The co-op's growth pattern is remarkable. Marcus began carefully. When did Heartland start expanding so aggressively? Ellen glanced toward the door before answering. About 20 years ago, when the current board took control. Before that, we were truly a cooperative, serving members, not exploiting them. The bitterness in her tone confirmed Marcus's suspicions. You don't approve of the changes. It's not my place to approve or disapprove, she replied diplomatically. But her eyes told a different story. I'm just a bookkeeper who's witnessed 2 decades of transformation. Marcus pressed gently. Your perspective would be invaluable to my analysis. Ellen studied him for a long moment, seeming to weigh her words carefully. The original mission of Heartland was to help farmers collectively negotiate better prices and share equipment costs. Now, she trailed off. Now it's something else entirely. Marcus finished for her. She nodded almost imperceptibly. Why are you really interested in our history, Mr. Reynolds? Vernon didn't hire you to explore the past. It was a perceptive question. Marcus needed to give her something that felt like truth. Let's just say I've noticed some unusual accounting practices that would be easier to understand with historical context. Ellen's posture stiffened. What kind of practices? Discrepancies between market values and farmer payouts, unusual fee structures, convenient rounding errors that always seem to favor the co-op rather than its members. The color drained from Ellen's face. You shouldn't be telling me this. Why not? Because people who ask these questions don't tend to stay in Millfield very long, she whispered. The last financial advisor who raised concerns had his contract terminated within a week. He also had a mysterious car accident on his way out of town. Marcus hadn't anticipated actual physical danger. This was supposed to be a straightforward financial con, not something potentially violent. Are you saying the board is dangerous? Ellen began arranging papers with trembling hands. I'm saying powerful people protect their interests by any means necessary. She looked up at him with unexpected intensity. If you're looking into what I think you are, be careful how you proceed. Marcus considered his options. Ellen clearly knew more than she was saying, but fear was holding her back. He decided to take a calculated risk. What if I told you I'm not exactly who Vernon thinks? I am? I'd say that makes two of us, Ellen replied cryptically. Before Marcus could question her meaning, Vernon appeared at the door. Reynolds, there you are. The processing facility manager is waiting to show you their operations. Marcus nodded, standing to leave. Thank you for the historical perspective, Ms. Porter. It's been enlightening. As he followed Vernon down the hall, Marcus processed this new information. Ellen Porter was more than just a reluctant witness to corruption. She seemed to be playing some deeper game of her own. The rest of the day passed in a blur of facility tours and introductions. Marcus maintained his cover, asking the right questions about efficiency and profit margins while secretly documenting every irregularity he observed. The weighing stations were particularly revealing. Outdated equipment that could easily be manipulated, with no oversight during the measurement process. That evening, as Marcus reviewed his notes in his rental house, a knock at the door surprised him. Ellen Porter stood on his porch, clutching a worn leather satchel. May I come in? She asked, glancing nervously over her shoulder. Marcus ushered her inside, curious. Is everything all right? No, she said simply, placing the satchel on his dining table. Nothing has been all right at Heartland for 20 years, but you already know that, don't you? Marcus maintained a neutral expression. What makes you say that? Because Vernon wouldn't have hired a real financial consultant with full access. He's not that careless. Ellen fixed him with a knowing look. You're investigating them. It wasn't a question. Marcus decided honesty, or at least a version of it, was his best approach. Let's just say my interest in Heartland's finances goes beyond what Vernon believes. Ellen nodded, as if confirming a suspicion. I thought so. She opened the satchel and removed a thick folder. These are copies of records I've kept privately. Documents that show exactly how Heartland has been systematically defrauding farmers. Marcus stared at her in surprise. You've been collecting evidence? Why? Because someone needed to, she said simply. I've watched families lose everything while Vernon and his cronies built vacation homes. I've entered the numbers that stole people's livelihoods. Her voice cracked slightly. Some nights I can hardly sleep for the shame of my complicity. Why not go to the authorities? Marcus asked, leafing through the meticulously organized documents. Ellen's laugh was hollow. The county prosecutor plays golf with the board chairman every Sunday. The sheriff's department's pension fund is managed by Vernon's brother-in-law. This town runs on Heartland money. Marcus understood now why she had approached him. What exactly do you want from me, Ms. Porter? First, I want to know who you really are, she said firmly. And then I want to know if you can help me make this right before I die. The raw honesty in her voice caught Marcus off guard. For a moment he considered telling her the truth, that he was just another predator, albeit one targeting different prey. Instead, he found himself saying, I think we might be able to help each other. Ellen's eyes brightened with something that looked dangerously like hope. Then perhaps you'd like to join me for dinner? There's much more I can tell you without the risk of being overheard at the office. That night, in Ellen's modest home filled with photographs of a life dedicated to this community, Marcus learned the true depth of Heartland's corruption and felt the first genuine stirrings of a conscience he'd spent 15 years ignoring. Saturday morning brought Millfield's annual Harvest Festival, an ironic celebration given how many farmers were struggling. Marcus hadn't planned to attend, but Ellen insisted it was crucial for his cover and would provide valuable insights into the community he was infiltrating. The town square had been transformed with hay bales, pumpkin displays, and booths selling everything from homemade jam to hand-carved wooden toys. Children ran laughing between game stations while a local band played country classics on a small stage. Doesn't exactly look like a community in crisis, Marcus observed, as he and Ellen strolled through the festivities. Farm folk are proud, Ellen replied. They'll go hungry before they'll let you see them suffer. Marcus noticed Vernon holding court near the beer tent, surrounded by board members and local businessmen. They all wore casual clothes, an unconvincing attempt to appear like regular townspeople rather than the architects of the community's decline. Mr. Reynolds, Vernon called, waving him over. Come meet the mayor. Marcus excused himself from Ellen and crossed to the group, slipping seamlessly into his consultant persona. Beautiful festival you have here. Tradition is important, the mayor said, pumping Marcus's hand enthusiastically, especially in changing times. Speaking of change, Vernon interjected, Reynolds here is helping us modernize Heartland's financial approach. We're expecting great things. The men exchanged knowing looks that made Marcus's skin crawl. The casual confidence with which they discussed modernization, their euphemism for systematic theft, spoke volumes about their sense of impunity. Reynolds, a familiar voice cut through his thoughts. Sarah Daniels approached, balancing a small girl on her hip. Didn't expect to see you mingling with the commoners. Vernon's smile tightened. Ms. Daniels, lovely to see you participating in community events. Wouldn't miss it, Sarah replied, her tone deceptively light. My daughter loves the petting. Zoo, don't you, Emma? The little girl, about 4 years old with her mother's striking blue eyes, nodded enthusiastically. I petted a goat and a big pig. Marcus found himself smiling genuinely at her excitement. Sounds like quite an adventure. Mr. Reynolds is helping Heartland become more efficient, Vernon explained to Sarah with barely concealed condescension. Sarah's eyes locked with Marcus's. Is that so? I'd love to hear about these efficiencies. Perhaps Mr. Reynolds would join Emma and me for some apple cider. Before Vernon could object, Marcus nodded. I'd be delighted. As they walked away, Sarah murmured, bold move, abandoning your keepers. I'm just being thorough, Marcus replied smoothly. Understanding community dynamics is part of my job. They reached a quiet corner where an elderly couple was selling hot cider. The man's weathered hands trembled slightly as he poured 3 cups. One small one for Emma. Thank you, Mr. Gunderson, Sarah said warmly. How's Martha feeling today? Better? Thanks to your soup, he replied with a grateful smile. Doctor says the medication's finally working. As they moved away, Sarah explained quietly, the Gundersons lost their dairy farm 3 years ago. Martha's medical bills wiped out their savings right when Heartland slashed milk payments by 30%. Now they survive on Social Security, and whatever they can sell at events like this. Marcus watched as Emma carefully sipped her cider, oblivious to the adult concerns swirling around her. You bring your daughter to a festival just to remind yourself of what you're fighting for? Sarah looked surprised at his perception. Something like that. Emma's the 5th generation of Daniels to live on our land. I don't want her to be the last. They found an empty bench where Emma could watch children playing nearby. So, Sarah began, what's your real angle, Reynolds? You're clearly too smart to believe you're actually helping farmers. What makes you think I have an angle? Because nobody works for Vernon Stillwell unless they're either corrupt or oblivious, and you don't strike me as oblivious. Marcus chuckled, despite himself. You're very direct. I don't have the luxury of subtlety. My family has 6 months before the bank forecloses, thanks to Heartland's creative payment structures. The timeline matched exactly what Marcus had seen in the acquisition targets folder. Is that what Vernon told you? Vernon doesn't tell me anything, but my father sits on the county agricultural committee. He hears things. Sarah's gaze was unwavering. Heartland's been manipulating crop prices and weights for years, but they've gotten bolder. More desperate. This was new information. They seem to be thriving. Sarah leaned closer, lowering her voice. Look around. See those corporate representatives by the barbecue? They're not here for the festival. They're here because Heartland is courting buyers. Rumor is Vernon's planning to sell the entire operation to an agricultural conglomerate. Marcus processed this revelation. If true, it explained the accelerated foreclosures. Vernon wasn't just stealing from farmers. He was preparing to cash out entirely, leaving nothing but economic devastation in his wake. Mommy, can I go play? Emma asked, pointing to the children's area. Of course, sweetie, stay where I can see you. Sarah watched her daughter run off, then turned back to Marcus. You know what the worst part is? When Heartland sells, they'll claim market forces made family farming unsustainable. They'll be praised for adapting to economic realities while families like mine become cautionary tales about failing to modernize. The bitterness in her voice resonated with something long buried in Marcus's past. Why stay and fight? Why not sell now on your terms? Because some things matter more than money. She answered simply, community, legacy. Knowing your work has meaning beyond profit margins. Her words struck an unexpected chord. Marcus had spent his adult life believing that money was the only true measure of success, the only security in an uncertain world. Yet sitting beside this fierce, principled woman, he felt a discomforting doubt about that fundamental assumption. Sarah, a middle-aged man approached, his expression concerned. Henderson just told me the bank's rejecting loan extensions for spring planting. Sarah's face paled. For everyone? Just those on Heartland's review list. Which includes us. Marcus recognized another piece of Vernon's strategy. Cutting off operating capital to force immediate sales rather than foreclosures. Cleaner, faster, and less likely to generate sympathy or legal challenges. I should go, Sarah said, standing abruptly. Emma, time to go see Grandpa. As she gathered her daughter, she turned back to Marcus. Whatever game you're playing at Heartland, just remember there are real people whose lives are being destroyed. People like Emma, who deserve a future on the land their family built. Watching her walk away, Marcus felt an unfamiliar sensation. The weight of moral consequence. For 15 years, he justified his cons as victimless crimes against institutions or wealthy marks who could afford the loss. He'd never had to witness the human cost of institutional corruption firsthand. As the festival continued around him, Marcus made his way through the crowd, seeing the community through new eyes. The elderly couple selling handmade quilts to supplement their inadequate retirement, the young family running a food truck because they'd lost their restaurant to predatory lending, the teenager selling prize-winning tomatoes to help pay for college. These weren't just potential marks or collateral damage in a sophisticated financial scheme. They were people fighting to preserve something meaningful against overwhelming odds. By the time Marcus returned to his rented house that evening, his original plan no longer seemed as straightforward as it had just days ago. For the first time in his career, he found himself considering an option that had never before entered his calculations. He could use his skills not just to steal from thieves, but to help their victims fight back. Monday morning found Marcus early at his temporary office in the co-op, determined to uncover the full extent of Heartland's corruption. Sarah's revelation about potential corporate buyers had changed his perspective. This wasn't just local grift. It was systematic predation on a scale he hadn't initially understood. You look like a man on a mission, Ellen observed, bringing him coffee without being asked. I need to understand the bigger picture, Marcus replied. Vernon isn't just skimming profits. He's preparing to sell the entire operation. Ellen nodded, grimly. I've suspected as much. The board's been quietly updating all the asset valuations and accelerating debt collection. I need to see anything you have on property acquisitions and banking relationships. Also, any communication with corporate entities outside Millfield. While Ellen gathered the requested materials, Marcus created a secure digital folder on an encrypted drive. If he was going to properly document this fraud, he needed irrefutable evidence organized systematically. Hours passed as Marcus pieced together the pattern of corruption. It wasn't just Heartland. The local bank, county assessors, office, and even parts of the state regulatory apparatus appeared compromised. Heartland had been manipulating everything from soil quality assessments to water rights allocations, all designed to devalue farms before acquiring them. This goes beyond financial fraud, Marcus muttered, reviewing loan documents with predatory terms masked by complex legal language. This is coordinated racketeering. Ellen returned mid-afternoon with another stack of files. These might interest you. Historical foreclosure patterns going back 30 years. Marcus began sorting through the yellowed papers, plotting the data points on a county map he'd pinned to the wall. A clear pattern emerged. Foreclosures radiated outward from Heartland's main facility like ripples in a pond, creating consolidated landholdings that would be far more valuable to a corporate buyer than scattered individual farms. As he reached the oldest records, a familiar name caught his eye. Webb, his father's name. Marcus stared at the foreclosure notice dated 22 years ago. Webb Family Farm, 180 acres, foreclosed for failure to meet loan obligations following catastrophic crop valuation adjustment by Heartland Cooperative. The blood rushed in his ears as long-suppressed memories flooded back. His father's bewildered rage as payments for their harvest came in at less than half the expected amount. The increasingly desperate attempts to secure operating loans, the final humiliation of the sheriff's sale, their belongings piled on the front lawn, his mother's tears as they drove away for the last time. "Are you all right?" Ellen's concerned voice broke through his thoughts. "You've gone pale." Marcus struggled to maintain his composure. "I'm fine, just connecting dots." He carefully set the Webb farm documents aside. "Ellen, how long have the current board members been involved with Heartland?" Most came in during the expansion 20 years ago. Vernon was originally brought in as a financial consultant, much like your cover story. Within 2 years, he was running everything. The parallels were unsettling. Had his father's farm been one of the first victims of Vernon's scheme? What about investors? Who really controls Heartland? Ellen hesitated. "That's complicated. On paper, it's a member-owned cooperative. But there's a separate investment entity called Meridian Agricultural Holdings that somehow gained controlling interest about 15 years ago. And who owns Meridian? That's the question, isn't it? The corporate structure is deliberately obscured. Shell companies, offshore entities. It's designed to be untraceable." Marcus's investigative instincts kicked in. Complex ownership structures were often the key to understanding who ultimately benefited from fraud. "I need to see everything related to Meridian." Ellen shook her head. "Those records aren't kept here. Vernon maintains them separately. Even I don't have access." This was a significant obstacle. Without understanding the ultimate beneficiaries, Marcus couldn't fully map the conspiracy. Where would Vernon keep sensitive documents? Does he have a home office? He has a lake house about 20 miles outside town. Very private, very secure. Ellen looked at him with sudden alarm. "You're not thinking of breaking in?" Marcus kept his expression neutral. "Just trying to understand all the information sources." Ellen wasn't fooled. "Whatever you're planning, be careful. Vernon has connections beyond Millfield. Powerful people protect their investments." The word investments triggered another thought. Marcus pulled up the county property records he'd accessed earlier, focusing on the Webb farm foreclosure. According to the records, the property had been purchased at auction by something called Cornerstone Holdings. Another shell company. "Ellen, do you recognize Cornerstone Holdings? They were active in property acquisitions about 20 years ago." She frowned in concentration. "The name sounds familiar. Wait." She left the room briefly, returning with a worn ledger. "Here. Cornerstone was one of the founding investors in Meridian Agricultural Holdings. The connection was undeniable. The same entity that had purchased his family's foreclosed farm had helped establish the investment vehicle that now controlled Heartland. What happened to the properties Cornerstone acquired? Marcus asked, maintaining professional detachment despite the personal revelation. Most were eventually consolidated under Heartland's land management division. Some were sold to developers once they'd been rezoned for commercial use. Marcus recalled driving past his childhood home years later to find a sprawling distribution center where fields of wheat once stood. At the time, he'd seen it as just another example of progress erasing the past. Now he recognized it as part of a calculated strategy. "Is this why you've stayed all these years?" Marcus asked Ellen suddenly. "To monitor their activities from the inside?" Ellen's eyes widened in surprise at his perception. "Partly. I help where I can. Farmers come to me for advice on dealing with Heartland's paperwork. Sometimes I find ways to delay foreclosures or identify filing errors that give families more time." "A double agent," Marcus observed with newfound respect. "Just an old woman trying to sleep at night." Ellen replied modestly. "But yes, I've been keeping records, hoping someday someone could use them to expose what's happening here." The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. He'd come to con the co-op, not to become Ellen's longed-for champion of justice. Yet with each revelation, his original plan seemed increasingly inadequate, even hollow. His phone buzzed with a text from Vernon. "Dinner tonight, 7 p.m. My house. Important opportunity to discuss." Marcus showed Ellen the message. "What do you think he wants?" "Vernon doesn't extend social invitations without purpose," she said cautiously. "He's either testing your loyalty or preparing to offer you a more permanent role. Either possibility could provide valuable information." "Looks like I'm having dinner with the devil. Be careful," Ellen warned. "Vernon's charming when it serves his purposes, but he's ruthless to anyone who threatens his operation." Marcus had encountered plenty of ruthless opponents in his career. None had ever connected to his personal history like this. The coincidence seemed too precise to be accidental. As he prepared to leave for the day, Marcus carefully photographed the Webb farm foreclosure documents. His father had died, believing he'd failed his family through poor management or bad luck. The truth, that he'd been targeted as part of a systematic land grab, might have broken him differently. Or it might have given him something to fight for. Walking to his car, Marcus spotted Sarah across the street, loading feed bags into her truck. Their eyes met briefly, her expression still suspicious but with a hint of curiosity. Marcus nodded slightly in acknowledgement before continuing on. Tonight, he would play Vernon's game, gather intelligence, and advance his cover story. But his objective had shifted. What had begun as a sophisticated financial con was evolving into something Marcus had never attempted before: justice. Vernon's lakeside home was exactly what Marcus expected. Ostentatious wealth masquerading as rustic charm. The cabin featured soaring cathedral ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water, and furniture that cost more than most of Millfield's residents earned in a year. Impressive place, Marcus commented as Vernon handed him a glass of expensive scotch. One of the perks of financial acumen, Vernon replied with practiced modesty. I believe in enjoying the fruits of success. Marcus wondered how many foreclosed farms had financed this particular fruit. The view alone must be worth the investment. Speaking of investments, Vernon gestured toward the patio. Join me outside. The others will be here shortly. The sunset painted the lake in hues of gold and crimson as they settled into cushioned chairs. Vernon studied Marcus with calculated intensity. You've exceeded expectations, Reynolds. Your analysis of our operational inefficiencies was quite perceptive. Marcus maintained his consultant persona. I simply identified opportunities others had overlooked. Precisely why I wanted to speak with you privately before the others arrive. Vernon leaned forward. How would you feel about making your position with Heartland permanent? Though Marcus had anticipated this possibility, the directness of the offer surprised him. I typically work on a project basis. Long-term commitments aren't really my style. Perhaps this will change your mind. Vernon handed him a folder containing a contract. Chief Financial Officer. Complete authority over all financial operations. Salary of $350,000 plus performance bonuses. Marcus scanned the document, noting the incentive structure tied directly to acquisition efficiency, a euphemism for foreclosure rates. Generous, very generous. The compensation package includes profit sharing, Vernon added. Last year, our executive team each received bonuses exceeding $500,000. With your expertise, I expect that figure to increase substantially. The numbers were staggering for a rural agricultural cooperative. Further confirmation that Heartland's legitimate business was merely a front for something far more lucrative. Why, me? Marcus asked. We've only worked together a week. Vernon's smile didn't reach his eyes. Because you understand what we're really doing here. Most financial consultants get squeamish when they glimpse our actual business model. You seem to appreciate its elegance. Marcus had indeed expressed admiration for their system, all part of his cover. Now that performance threatened to trap him in exactly the role he'd been pretending to desire. It's certainly an impressive operation, Marcus hedged, though I admit I'm curious about the end game. Sarah Daniels mentioned rumors of a potential corporate sale. Vernon's expression darkened momentarily at Sarah's name before he smoothed it into casual dismissal. Daniels should worry more about her own financial situation than spreading gossip. He sipped his scotch before continuing. But yes, there have been discussions with potential buyers. Agricultural land consolidation is where the real value lies. And the farmers who lose their livelihoods in the process? Market casualties, Vernon said dismissively. Agriculture is evolving. Those who can't adapt deserve to fail. The callousness wasn't surprising, but hearing it stated so bluntly still affected Marcus more than he'd expected. I see. The position comes with another benefit, Vernon added, misinterpreting Marcus's reaction. Complete immunity from any unpleasantness when the transition occurs. Transition? Let's just say when the corporate acquisition is finalized. Local attitudes may become problematic. The executive team will be well positioned to relocate with generous severance packages. The community's inevitable decline won't be our concern. The scope of the plan was becoming clear. Vernon and his associates weren't just stealing from farmers, they were systematically dismantling an entire community for profit, planning to abandon the husk once they'd extracted maximum value. Cars began arriving, saving Marcus from an immediate response. The evening proceeded with expensive food, flowing alcohol, and increasingly unguarded conversation. as Vernon's inner circle welcomed what they assumed was their newest co-conspirator. The beauty of it, explained Melissa Reeves, the financial director after several drinks, is that we've structured everything to appear perfectly legal. By the time anyone could prove otherwise, the assets will be secured and will be long gone. The acquisition timeline has accelerated, added Robert Klein, nervously adjusting his glasses. Meridian wants to finalize within 6 months. Vernon shot him a warning glance. Details are still being negotiated. Marcus calculated rapidly. 6 months aligned with the foreclosure targets he'd seen for Sarah's farm and others. Vernon was orchestrating a final wave of acquisitions to maximize the cooperative's value before selling. What about the remaining holdouts? Marcus asked, casually. The Daniels farm, for instance. Sarah seems quite determined. Vernon's smile was cold. Determination doesn't matter when you can't make loan payments. Their operating loan application will be rejected next week. Without capital for spring planting, they'll have no choice but to sell. At our price. The evening continued with increasingly explicit discussions of how Heartland manipulated everything from crop grading to market access. These people had been operating with impunity for so long, they no longer bothered to disguise their corruption. As the gathering concluded, Vernon pulled Marcus aside. The contract requires a decision within 3 days. I suggest you consider it carefully. This opportunity won't come again. And if I decline? Marcus asked, testing. Vernon's expression hardened slightly. Then our professional relationship would necessarily conclude, and you would be expected to maintain absolute confidentiality about our operations. We protect our interests vigorously. The threat was unmistakable. Marcus nodded as if considering the terms. I'll review the details and let you know. Driving back to town, Marcus confronted a genuine ethical dilemma. The position Vernon offered would provide unprecedented access to Heartland's operations and evidence of their crimes. It would also place him squarely within the conspiracy, potentially complicating any later attempt to expose it. More troubling was the financial temptation. The compensation package would exceed the value of his planned con by a significant margin, all legitimate on paper, with none of the risks of theft. All he had to do was become exactly the kind of predator he'd originally planned to target. The irony wasn't lost on him. Back at his rental house, Marcus spread the contract on his dining table alongside his growing evidence file. The rational choice was clear. Accept Vernon's offer, gain insider access, and then decide whether to proceed with his original con or pursue this unexpected path toward justice. Yet something held him back. The memory of Sarah's fierce determination to preserve her family legacy, Ellen's quiet resistance from within the system, and the haunting connection to his own family's loss. As Marcus stared at the contract, his phone buzzed with an incoming text, an unknown number. Need to talk, Granary Road, end of the lane, tomorrow, 7 a.m., come alone. S. Sarah Daniels. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Had she somehow learned about Vernon's offer? Marcus set the phone down and returned his attention to the contract. For the first time in his career, the promise of financial gain felt insufficient, even hollow. The choice before him wasn't just about money anymore. It was about who he was becoming. Dawn broke in misty layers over the farmland as Marcus navigated the rutted dirt road toward the Daniels property. He'd spent a restless night weighing his options, but curiosity about Sarah's unexpected message had won out over caution. The farm that came into view was a study in resilient dignity. The house and barn needed paint. The equipment looked well-worn, but everything was meticulously maintained, a stark contrast to the neglect he'd observed on other struggling properties. Sarah waited by a weathered fence, arms crossed against the morning chill. Her expression remained guarded as he approached. Wasn't sure you'd come, she said by way of greeting. Your message wasn't exactly detailed, Marcus replied. How did you get my number? Small towns have few secrets. She nodded toward a path leading between fields of harvested corn stalks. Walk with me. I don't want to be overheard. They followed the path in silence until reaching a rise overlooking the entire farm. Golden fields stretching toward distant tree lines, a small pond reflecting the morning sky, cattle grazing in pastures beyond the barn. My great-grandfather built that house with his bare hands, Sarah said quietly. Every generation since has added something to this land. The pond, the orchard, the north field irrigation. We don't just farm here. We build something that outlasts us. Marcus understood she was showing him what was at stake. It's beautiful. It's also valuable, especially as part of Vernon's land consolidation plan. Sarah turned to face him directly. He offered you a permanent position last night, didn't he? Marcus kept his expression neutral. What makes you think that? Because that's his pattern. Find someone with financial expertise, someone without local ties, someone ambitious enough to ignore the human cost. Offer them wealth and immunity. Create another accomplice. Her assessment was unnervingly accurate. You seem to have studied his methods carefully. When something threatens everything you love, you pay attention. Sarah's gaze was unwavering. The question is whether you've accepted his offer. I haven't decided. Then I still have time to make my case. She gestured toward the farmhouse. Come inside. There's someone you should meet. The house's interior was warm and lived in. Family photos covering walls, well-used furniture arranged for conversation rather than appearance. The lingering scent of breakfast in the air. Emma sat at the kitchen table coloring, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. Mr. Reynolds, she exclaimed, recognizing him from the festival. Do you want to see my picture? Marcus found himself kneeling beside her chair, examining her crayon drawing of a farm scene. Is that your house? She nodded enthusiastically. And that's Mommy, and Grandpa, and me, and our dog Rusty. We're having a picnic. It's beautiful, Marcus said sincerely. You're quite an artist. Sarah watched this interaction with surprised interest before calling to an adjacent room. Dad? He's here. A man in his 60s appeared, leaning slightly on a cane. Despite his evident physical challenges, his eyes were sharp with intelligence and assessment. So you're Vernon's new numbers man. James Daniels extended his hand with surprising strength. Sarah says you might be different from the others. Dad was on the original Heartland board, Sarah explained. Before Vernon and his investors took control, they settled in the living room, where James recounted the co-op's transformation from a true farmers' collective to Vernon's predatory operation. His insider perspective confirmed much of what Marcus had already discovered, while adding crucial context about the human cost. 35 families have lost their farms in the past decade, James concluded. Good people, skilled, farmers, pushed into bankruptcy through deliberate manipulation. Why hasn't anyone fought back? Marcus asked. Legally, I mean. 3 families tried, Sarah replied. One ran out of money for legal fees. Another settled for pennies on the dollar when their lawyer suddenly withdrew from the case. The third, she glanced at her father, Frank Miller, James finished grimly. Accident on his tractor? Very convenient timing. The implication was clear. Vernon's vigorous protection of interests extended beyond legal intimidation. Are you saying they murdered him? Marcus asked incredulously. I'm saying nothing ever got proven, James replied carefully. But Frank had just obtained banking records showing how his loan terms had been altered after signing. The stakes were higher than Marcus had anticipated. This wasn't just financial fraud. It was systemic corruption willing to eliminate threats by any means necessary. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Though he already suspected the answer, Sarah leaned forward intently. Because we think you might be in a position to help us. You have access Vernon doesn't usually grant outsiders. You seem to understand financial systems. And you've shown moments of decency. The last part was clearly difficult for her to admit. Marcus almost smiled at her reluctant acknowledgement. What exactly are you asking me to do? Just verify what we already suspect, James said. We need concrete evidence of how they're manipulating crop values and loan terms. Documentation that would stand up to legal scrutiny. Evidence Marcus had already begun collecting, though for very different purposes. That's a significant risk, he observed. What makes you think I'd be willing to take it? Sarah studied him with those disconcertingly perceptive blue eyes. Because you recognized Emma as a person, not an obstacle. Because you listen to Ellen Porter when others dismiss her. Because sometimes, when Vernon is talking, you get this look, like you're swallowing something bitter. Her observations were uncomfortably accurate. Marcus had always prided himself on his impenetrable facade, yet somehow this farm woman had glimpsed behind it. Emma returned from the kitchen, climbing into her mother's lap with the uninhibited confidence of a child. Who knows she's cherished? Is Mr. Reynolds going to help save our farm? The directness of the question momentarily stunned Marcus. Before he could formulate an appropriately non-committal response, a truck roared into the driveway, horn blaring urgently. Sarah rose quickly, passing Emma to her grandfather. That's Mike Henderson. Something's wrong. They hurried outside to meet their neighbor, a man in his 40s with panic evident on his face. It's Ellen Porter. Collapsed at the co-op. They've taken her to County General. What happened? Sarah demanded. Heart attack, they think. She was arguing with Vernon about something right before it happened. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. I need to get to the hospital. We're coming too, Sarah said firmly, already heading for her truck. The 20-minute drive to the hospital passed in tense silence. Marcus replayed his conversations with Ellen, wondering if the stress of their clandestine evidence gathering had contributed to her condition. The guilt was unexpected and uncomfortable. At the hospital, they found Ellen in the cardiac care unit, pale but conscious. Her eyes widened at the sight of Marcus and Sarah arriving together. Well, she managed weakly, this is an interesting development. Marcus approached her bedside, genuinely relieved to see her alert. What happened? Just an old heart acting up, Ellen deflected. Nothing dramatic. Mike said you were arguing with Vernon. Sarah pressed gently. Ellen's expression grew serious. He was asking about missing files. Files I'd copied for you, Marcus. He suspects something. This changed the calculation significantly. If Vernon was already suspicious, Marcus's window for action was narrowing rapidly. A nurse entered to check Ellen's vitals, prompting Sarah to step outside. Marcus leaned closer to Ellen's bed. I need to know if this was really just a health issue, he said quietly, or if Vernon did something to provoke it. Ellen's fingers tightened around his. He threatened me, said he knew someone had been accessing restricted files. When I defended myself, he mentioned how tragic it would be if I suffered a health crisis before retirement. Her voice trembled slightly. The stress triggered the episode. The doctors say it was mild, thank goodness. The implicit threat confirmed Marcus's growing understanding of what he was facing. Vernon wasn't just a white-collar criminal. He was something far more dangerous. I'm going to fix this, Marcus promised, surprising himself with his sincerity. Ellen studied his face. No, when you first arrived, I thought you might be another of Vernon's recruits. Then I decided you were probably an undercover investigator. She smiled faintly. But you're something else entirely, aren't you? Before Marcus could respond, Sarah returned with the doctor, who insisted Ellen needed rest. As they left the hospital, Sarah turned to Marcus with newfound determination. I don't know exactly who you are or what you're really doing in Millfield, she said, but I do know you care about Ellen. That's good enough for now. She extended her hand. Partners? Marcus looked at her outstretched hand, realizing he'd reached a point of no return. Accepting her offer meant committing to a path with no guarantee of personal profit, possibly even putting himself at risk for others' benefit. Everything his 15 years as a con artist had taught him screamed against it, yet he found himself taking her hand, sealing a partnership that would transform both their lives in ways neither could predict. Partners, he agreed, feeling something shift fundamentally within himself. Now let's go get the evidence we need. Marcus sat alone in his rental house that evening, surrounded by evidence of Heartland's corruption, financial statements, loan documents, property transfers, all meticulously organized and annotated. The case against Vernon and his associates was overwhelming yet still incomplete without the final piece. Proof linking Heartland to Meridian Agricultural Holdings and its shadowy investors. His phone buzzed with a text from Vernon. Expecting your decision on the contract tomorrow. 9 a.m., my office. The deadline forced clarity. Marcus could no longer postpone his choice between exploiting Heartland's corruption for personal gain or dismantling it to help its victims. Both paths carried significant risks, but for entirely different reasons. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He opened the door to find Sarah on his porch, determination etched across her features. We need to talk, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Her eyes widened at the evidence wall he'd constructed. You've been busy, just organizing what I've found, Marcus replied, suddenly self-conscious about his obsessive documentation. Ellen's been helping me understand the historical patterns. Sarah studied the financial timelines and property acquisition maps with obvious appreciation. This is impressive, almost like you've done this kind of thing before. The observation came too close to the truth for comfort. Marcus deflected. What brings you here this late? Dad remembered something important. She placed a weathered ledger on the table. This is from the original Heartland board meetings, before Vernon took over. The initial investment from Meridian came through a lawyer named Philip Westcott. Marcus recognized the name immediately. The same lawyer who handled the Webb farm foreclosure. You know about the Webb case? Marcus hesitated, then decided a partial truth was necessary. I found it while researching Heartland's acquisition patterns. It seems to have been one of their first targeted foreclosures. Sarah nodded. Dad says Richard Webb was the most vocal opponent of the changes Vernon was proposing. When his farm was suddenly foreclosed, others became afraid to speak out. Richard Webb, my father. The connection to his personal history felt increasingly like more than coincidence. The important thing, Sarah continued, unaware of his internal revelation, is that Dad thinks Westcott might still be practicing law in Kansas City. If anyone knows who's really behind Meridian, it would be him. Marcus considered the implications. Even if we found him, attorney-client privilege would prevent him from revealing his clients, unless we can prove the privilege doesn't apply. Because the information was used to commit fraud, Sarah countered. Dad says that's a legal exception. Her determination was impressive, but Marcus recognized the dangerous naivety in her approach. People like Vernon didn't leave loose ends, especially ones that could testify against them. Sarah, these people aren't just criminals. They've hurt people who threatened their operation. He gestured toward his evidence wall. Even if we gather every piece of documentation, who exactly are we taking it to? The local authorities are compromised, and state regulators move too slowly to stop what's happening now. Her expression hardened. So what's your solution? Give up? Accept Vernon's job offer and become part of the problem? How did you? Ellen told me he offered you a permanent position. She also said you haven't accepted yet, which is the only reason I'm standing here. Marcus felt unexpectedly defensive. It's complicated. No, it's really not. Sarah's voice was quiet but intense. Either you help the people being destroyed by this system, or you become another parasite feeding on their destruction. There's no middle ground here. Her moral certainty both irritated and fascinated him. In his world, everything existed in shades of gray, marks and cons, predators and prey, winners and losers. Sarah's black and white perspective seemed simultaneously naive and powerful. Even if I wanted to help, Marcus argued, we'd need resources, legal expertise, protection from retaliation. We need someone who understands financial systems well, enough to expose their manipulation. Sarah interrupted. Someone who can speak their language and anticipate their moves. Someone like you. The faith implicit in her statement was unearned, and would be entirely misplaced if she knew his true identity. Yet it affected him more profoundly than he cared to admit. Why do you care so much? He asked suddenly. Why not just sell the farm and start over somewhere else? Give Emma an easier life? Something flickered across Sarah's face. A momentary vulnerability beneath her determined exterior. 2 years ago, my husband was killed in a car accident. Emma was barely 3. In those first dark months, the only thing that kept me functioning was the rhythm of the farm. Animals needing care, crops needing attention. This land has been the one constant through generations of our family's joys and sorrows. She moved to the window, gazing out at the night. Emma knows every inch of this farm. She collects eggs from the same chicken coop where I gathered eggs as a child, where my father did before me. When she climbs the old oak by the pond, she's reaching for the same branches my grandfather carved his initials into. Her voice softened. This isn't just property, Marcus. It's the physical embodiment of our family's story. I can't just abandon it because some corrupt businessmen decided our legacy is less important than their profit margins. The raw emotion in her words resonated with something long buried in Marcus's own history. The childhood security he'd lost when his family's farm was taken. The rootlessness that had defined his adult life. He'd spent 15 years chasing financial security through increasingly elaborate cons, yet had never recaptured the sense of belonging Sarah was fighting to preserve for her daughter. I need to show you something, he said abruptly, retrieving a folder from his desk. Sarah accepted it with curiosity, then froze as she read the contents. This is the Webb farm foreclosure. Why are you so interested in this particular case? Marcus took a deep breath. Because Richard Webb was my father. Her eyes widened in shock. You're Richard Webb's son. The family moved away after the foreclosure. No one knew what happened to them. My father died 5 years later, Marcus said flatly. Heart attack at 48. My mother struggled to support us on minimum wage jobs. I left home at 17 and never looked back. Understanding dawned in Sarah's expression. That's why you're here. You're investigating what happened to your family's farm. It was a plausible explanation, far more noble than his actual purpose. Marcus considered claiming it as his cover story, but found himself unwilling to build another layer of deception between them. No, he admitted quietly. I didn't know about the connection until I found those documents. I came to Millfield for other reasons. Sarah's eyes narrowed with renewed suspicion. What reasons? The moment of truth had arrived sooner than Marcus expected. His instinct for self-preservation urged another carefully constructed lie, but something stronger demanded honesty, perhaps the first real honesty of his adult life. "I came here to con Heartland," he stated bluntly. "I'm not a financial consultant. I'm a confidence man. I specialize in identifying corrupt organizations, infiltrating them, and stealing their illegitimate profits." Sarah stared at him in stunned silence, processing this revelation. "You're a thief." "I prefer to think of myself as a specialized wealth redistributor," Marcus replied with a hint of his usual glibness, though it felt hollow even to his own ears. "I only target operations that are already criminal. I just skim from the skimmers." "And that's what you planned for Heartland? Steal their money and disappear?" "That was the plan," Marcus confirmed. "Until I met Ellen. And you. Until I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about people's lives and legacies. Until I discovered my own family's connection to all this." Sarah's expression shifted through shock, anger, and finally to something more complex. "So what's your plan now?" It was the question Marcus had been asking himself all day, with his cover potentially compromised after Ellen's confrontation with Vernon. His original con was becoming increasingly risky. The job offer presented an alternate path to profit, but would require becoming the very thing he despised. Or there was this third option, the one Sarah and Ellen seemed to believe in, using his skills not for personal gain, but to dismantle the system that had harmed so many, including his own family. "I don't know," he admitted. "For the first time in my career, I'm not sure what the play is." Sarah studied him with those disconcertingly perceptive eyes. "You're at a crossroads, Marcus Webb. Tomorrow you either become Vernon's newest accomplice, disappear with whatever you can steal, or you help us fight back." Put so starkly, the choice seemed obvious. Yet Marcus had spent 15 years avoiding exactly this kind of moral entanglement. His success as a con artist depended on emotional detachment, seeing marks as targets rather than people, prioritizing his interests above all else. Committing to Sarah's cause meant abandoning the principles that had defined his adult life. It meant risking his freedom not for financial gain but for justice, a concept he'd long dismissed as naive and impractical. "I need time to think," he said finally. Sarah nodded, moving toward the door. "Vernon expects your answer tomorrow morning. We need your decision by then too." After she left, Marcus returned to his evidence wall, seeing it with new eyes. He'd been documenting Heartland's corruption to facilitate his con and potentially negotiate leverage if things went sideways. Now these same materials represented something entirely different, the foundation for justice rather than theft. He thought of Ellen in her hospital bed, still fighting from within a corrupt system she could have abandoned decades ago. He remembered Emma's innocent question, "Is Mr. Reynolds going to help save our farm?" Most disturbingly, he recalled his father's bewildered devastation as their family legacy was stripped away through fraud, the same scheme now threatening Sarah's farm and others. For 15 years, Marcus had justified his cons as victimless, crimes against deserving targets. He'd convinced himself he was merely exploiting corrupt systems rather than contributing to them. Yet faced with the human cost of Heartland's predation, those justifications felt increasingly hollow. As midnight approached, Marcus made his decision, one that would irrevocably change his life and many others in Millfield. Whether it was redemption, revenge, or something else entirely, he couldn't yet say. But for the first time since he'd left home at 17, Marcus Webb chose to fight for something beyond his own immediate gain. Vernon Stillwell's office projected calculated power, leather furniture, agricultural awards, and a wall of photographs showing him with state politicians and business leaders. He gestured for Marcus to sit as he reviewed the employment contract. "So, Reynolds," Vernon said without looking up, "have you made your decision?" Marcus had rehearsed this moment carefully. "I have some concerns about the compensation structure." Vernon's eyebrows rose slightly. "The package is extremely generous." "It's not the amount," Marcus clarified. "It's the timing. With the potential corporate acquisition, I'd prefer guaranteed payments rather than performance-based incentives that might not materialize if ownership changes." The calculated display of avarice worked perfectly. Vernon relaxed, recognizing the familiar language of self-interest. "That can be arranged. I appreciate a man who looks after his own interests." "Speaking of interests," Marcus continued, "I'd like to understand more about the relationship with Meridian Agricultural Holdings. If I'm joining the executive team, I should know who I'm ultimately working for." Vernon's expression cooled slightly. "Meridian's investors value their privacy. Rest assured, they're fully committed to our strategy. Of course. Marcus backpedaled smoothly. Just due diligence on my part. I'm prepared to sign today with those compensation adjustments. Vernon's smile returned. Excellent. Legal will prepare a revised contract by this afternoon. He extended his hand. Welcome to the inner circle, Reynolds. Marcus accepted the handshake, suppressing his revulsion. Looking forward to our partnership. As soon as he left Heartland's offices, Marcus drove directly to the Daniels farm where Sarah, her father, and Ellen Porter, recently released from the hospital, waited anxiously. He bought it, Marcus announced, entering the kitchen. As of this afternoon, I'll be Heartland's new CFO with complete access to their financial systems. Ellen's relief was palpable. Thank goodness. After yesterday's confrontation, I worried he might suspect your true intentions. Vernon only sees what he expects to see, Marcus explained. He expected ambition and greed, so that's what I showed him. How much time do we have? James Daniels asked, ever practical. Not much. Vernon mentioned finalizing the corporate sale. Within 6 months, but based on their accelerated foreclosure timeline, I'd guess 3 months at most. Sarah paced the worn linoleum floor. That's not enough time to build a legal case, especially with local authorities compromised. We don't need the local authorities, Marcus replied confidently. Not if we can identify who's really behind Meridian and expose the entire operation at once. And how exactly do we do that? Sarah challenged. Marcus outlined the strategy he'd developed overnight. First, we need allies. Other farmers willing to document Heartland's practices and testify if necessary. People you trust completely. James nodded thoughtfully. I can think of 5 or 6 families who've been fighting this battle quietly for years. People who've experienced the same manipulation we have. Good. Second, we need technical documentation of how they're manipulating weights and grades. Marcus turned to Ellen. Can you show me exactly how the system works? The digital scales have been tampered with, Ellen confirmed. I can show you the calibration records that prove it. Perfect. And finally, Marcus continued, we need to follow the money. Vernon's careful with paper trails, but he's arrogant. Now that I'm part of the team, he'll give me access to the actual financial flows. Sarah looked skeptical. Even if we gather all this evidence, who do we take it to? The state agricultural commissioner is Vernon's golf buddy. We don't start with officials, Marcus explained. We start with the farmers. Build a coalition large, enough that authorities can't ignore it. Then we approach state and federal regulators simultaneously, creating too much pressure for Vernon's political connections to suppress. James Daniels studied Marcus with newfound respect. You've done this kind of thing before, haven't you? Exposed corruption, I mean. Marcus chose his words carefully. Let's just say I understand how these schemes work from the inside. Ellen Porter's shrewd eyes suggested she understood more than she was saying about his background. The question remains, once you have CFO access, how long before Vernon realizes you're not actually implementing his agenda? I'll give him enough legitimate improvements to maintain cover, Marcus assured her. Small efficiencies that benefit the co-op without harming farmers. The trick is appearing to be fully committed while gathering evidence. Sarah had been unusually quiet during this exchange. Now she spoke directly to Marcus. This plan puts you at significant risk. If Vernon discovers what you're really doing, the concern in her voice was unexpected. Risk is part of the game, Marcus replied with practiced nonchalance. Besides, Vernon's not the only one who can create leverage. What do you mean? James asked. Marcus smiled slightly. Let's just say I'm implementing some insurance policies. Now let's identify our potential allies. Over the next 2 hours, they compiled a list of farmers who might join their cause. Each had experienced Heartland's manipulation firsthand. Crops mysteriously downgraded, weights inexplicably reduced, loan terms suddenly changed. The Miller family should be first, James suggested. After what happened to Frank, they have the most reason to fight back. Are they still in the area? Marcus asked. Allison Miller runs the farm now, Sarah explained. She's struggling but determined to preserve what her husband built. Perfect. Who else? By noon they had identified 12 potential allies. A small number, but perhaps enough to start building momentum. I should speak with them individually, James suggested. They know and trust me. I'll go with you, Sarah insisted. Some of these conversations will be difficult. Marcus nodded agreement. Meanwhile, I'll begin documenting Heartland's internal systems. Ellen, can you show me exactly how the manipulation works without raising suspicions? Leave that to me, Ellen assured him with surprising vigor for someone recently hospitalized. I've been hiding my true activities for years. Vernon still sees me as a harmless old bookkeeper. As they finalized their plans, Marcus found himself in the unfamiliar position of leading a team rather than working alone. More unsettling was the trust these people placed in him. Trust he hadn't earned and, given his history, probably didn't deserve. Sarah seemed to sense his discomfort. When the others moved to the porch to discuss specific farmers, she held him back. "You're not used to this, are you?" she observed. "Working with others, being part of something larger than yourself." Marcus met her perceptive gaze. "My usual. Operations are more independent, and usually for your benefit alone," she added without judgment. "This is different." "Yes," he admitted. "It is." Having second thoughts, Marcus considered the question seriously. "No, but I'm not used to others depending on me." "If I fail, you won't be failing alone," Sarah interrupted. "That's the point of an alliance. We succeed or fail together." The concept was foreign to his natural individualism, yet oddly appealing. For 15 years Marcus had operated in isolation, trusting no one, responsible for no one. The burden of that solitude had become so familiar he'd stopped noticing its weight until now, when suddenly offered the possibility of sharing it. "I should get back to Heartland," he said, uncomfortable with the direction of his thoughts. "Vernon's expecting me to sign the revised contract this afternoon." Sarah nodded, then surprised him by briefly touching his arm. A simple gesture of solidarity that affected him more than it should have. "Be careful." "Always am," he replied with his usual confident smile, though for the first time in his career, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility for others' welfare, and recognized it was changing him in ways he hadn't anticipated and couldn't control. The Miller's kitchen smelled of fresh coffee and lingering traces of breakfast as Allison Miller absorbed the information James and Sarah had shared. Her expression shifted from surprise to cautious hope. "You're saying someone inside Heartland is helping gather evidence?" she asked, wrapping weathered hands around her coffee mug. "Someone with financial expertise," Sarah confirmed carefully. "They've already documented several fraudulent practices." "And you trust this person?" Allison's skepticism was understandable. After what her family had endured, James leaned forward earnestly. "We believe they have personal reasons for wanting to expose Heartland's corruption." Allison studied them both before responding. "Frank spent 2 years trying to prove what Heartland was doing to us. If he were here," her voice wavered momentarily, "he would want me to help. What exactly do you need?" "Documentation," Sarah explained. "Records of your dealings with Heartland. Weight receipts, quality assessments, payment statements, anything showing discrepancies." "I have all of Frank's files," Allison said, determination replacing grief in her eyes. "He was meticulous. Always. Said someday the truth would matter. It matters now," James assured her. By week's end, Sarah and her father had secured commitments from 8 farming families, each agreeing to document Heartland's practices and testify if necessary. Not everyone they approached was willing to risk Vernon's retaliation, but those who joined their cause did so, with the fierce determination of people who had endured injustice too long. Meanwhile, Marcus settled into his new role as Heartland's CFO, carefully balancing his cover responsibilities with his clandestine evidence gathering. Vernon introduced him to the executive team as the financial wizard who will maximize our final phase, an ominous phrase that confirmed the accelerated timeline. Marcus's office, directly adjacent to Vernon's, provided unprecedented access to Heartland's operations. The first week passed in careful observation, identifying which employees were willing participants in the fraud and which were merely following orders without understanding the broader scheme. "The weighing station operators know the scales are rigged," he reported during a late-night meeting at Ellen's house. "But the processing floor workers are mostly innocent. They're just following procedures designed to manipulate crop grading." Ellen nodded in confirmation. "Most employees have no idea how systematic the fraud is. They see individual practices without recognizing the pattern." Marcus spread documentation across Ellen's dining table. "The pattern is the key. I've identified 3 main components: weight manipulation, quality downgrading, and hidden fee structures." He pointed to specific examples. Individually, each might be dismissed as error or aggressive business practices. Together, they're undeniable fraud. Sarah studied the documents with growing anger. "They've been taking nearly 40% of farmers' rightful payments. And that's just the direct theft," Marcus added grimly. "Their loan structures are designed to create defaults, allowing them to acquire foreclosed properties at fractions of market value." James Daniels shook his head in disgust. "They're not just stealing crops, they're stealing generations of work." "The good news," Marcus continued, is that I've gained access to their acquisition planning. I know exactly which farms they're targeting next and on what timeline. Can you alter those timelines? Sarah asked. Buy people more time? Marcus nodded. I've already implemented efficiency reviews that effectively delay some foreclosure proceedings. Vernon thinks it's to maximize property values before sale. How long can you maintain this charade? Ellen asked worriedly. Vernon's not a fool. He'll eventually realize you're not advancing his agenda. I'm giving him enough legitimate improvements to maintain credibility. Marcus assured her. The shipping logistics restructuring I proposed will actually save the co-op money. I just didn't mention it also removes one of their mechanisms for cheating farmers. And you're documenting everything? James confirmed. Every transaction, every manipulation, every fraudulent practice. Marcus tapped his encrypted laptop. I'm creating parallel records. What farmers should have been paid versus what they actually received. The discrepancies are damning. Sarah's expression remained troubled. This is all financial evidence. What about the human cost? The families destroyed, the community damaged. That's where your network comes in, Marcus explained. Each family's story demonstrates the pattern of harm. Together with the financial evidence, it creates a comprehensive case. As their meeting concluded, Marcus noticed Vernon's car passing slowly by Ellen's house. The coincidence seemed unlikely given the late hour. We need to be more careful, he warned. Vary our meeting locations, communicate through secure channels. Vernon may be watching more closely than we realized. The following week confirmed his suspicions when Robert Klein, the perpetually nervous operations manager, appeared in Marcus's office doorway. Vernon asked me to let you know he's got someone following up on your background, Klein said quietly, glancing nervously toward the hallway. He's concerned about your frequent meetings with Ellen Porter. Marcus maintained a neutral expression despite the internal alarm. Ellen's institutional knowledge is invaluable for my financial restructuring. Did Vernon specify his concerns? No, but Klein lowered his voice further. Be careful, Reynolds. Vernon doesn't tolerate disloyalty. After Klein departed, Marcus immediately implemented countermeasures. He scheduled ostentatious lunch meetings with Vernon, proposed aggressive cost-cutting, measures that appeared to target farmers but actually eliminated redundant administrative positions, and made a show of working late while secretly copying critical documents. The pretense seemed to reassure Vernon temporarily, but Marcus knew his window of opportunity was narrowing. He accelerated his evidence gathering, focusing on the most damning documentation. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. While reviewing historical acquisition records, Marcus discovered a pattern of shell companies beyond Cornerstone and Meridian, all using the same offshore registration service. Through careful digital forensics, he traced the ultimate beneficial ownership to a name that stunned him: Senator William Harrington, chair of the State Agricultural Committee, and an outspoken champion of family farms. The senator is the primary investor behind Meridian, Marcus revealed during their next secret meeting held in the back room of James's veterinarian friend's office. He's been using his political position to block investigations while profiting from farm consolidation. That's why state regulators ignored our complaints, James realized. Harrington controls the oversight mechanisms. Exactly. And he's scheduled to receive over $30 million from the corporate sale. This changes everything, Sarah said, energy infusing her voice. If we can prove a sitting senator is behind this scheme, we'd need federal authorities, Marcus cautioned. This level of corruption extends beyond state boundaries. I might have a contact, Ellen offered unexpectedly. My nephew works for the U.S. Attorney's Office in Kansas City. He's always believed my concerns about Heartland, even when local authorities dismissed them. Can he be trusted with this information? Marcus asked. Once we involve federal authorities, we lose control of the investigation. Jason has integrity, Ellen insisted, and the resources to handle something this significant. Make the contact, Marcus decided. But carefully, no electronic communications, nothing that could be traced. As their network expanded and evidence accumulated, Marcus found himself increasingly invested in the outcome beyond his original motivation. The faces of the farmers fighting alongside them, Allison Miller's quiet determination, the Hendersons' financial desperation, the elderly Gundersons' dignity despite their losses, transformed abstract concepts of justice into personal commitment. Most disturbing was his growing attachment to Sarah and her family. Emma had taken to greeting him with enthusiastic hugs during his visits to the farm, and James treated him with the respect due a valued ally rather than the suspicion his actual history warranted. Sarah herself remained somewhat guarded, but their working relationship had evolved into something approaching friendship, and occasionally, in unguarded moments, something that hinted at deeper possibilities Marcus refused to examine too closely. "You've changed since you arrived," she observed one evening as they updated their evidence catalog at her kitchen table after Emma had gone to bed. Marcus looked up from his notes. "How so?" "When you first came to town, you had this distance, like you were observing everyone from behind glass. Now you're fully engaged, genuinely committed." Her perception was uncomfortable but accurate. "The stakes are higher than I initially understood." Sarah studied him thoughtfully. "It's more than that. You've found something worth fighting for beyond yourself." Before Marcus could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal too much, his phone buzzed with a text from Ellen. "Vernon, asking questions about your past employment. Be careful." The warning confirmed his growing sense that time was running out. Vernon's suspicions hadn't been fully allayed by his performance. The question was whether their network and evidence were strong enough yet to withstand the confrontation that now seemed inevitable. Vernon's summons came 3 weeks into Marcus's tenure as CFO. The terse email requested his presence for an urgent discussion of background verification at 4 p.m., strategically scheduled after most employees had departed for the day. Marcus recognized the trap immediately. Vernon had discovered something in his fabricated history, something significant enough to warrant confrontation rather than continued surveillance. The question was whether Vernon had uncovered Marcus's true identity or merely found inconsistencies in his Jason Reynolds persona. Either way, Marcus needed to prepare. He spent the morning quietly backing up critical evidence to secure locations and encrypting his most damning findings about Heartland's operations. By noon, he'd established digital dead drops that Sarah and Ellen could access even if he was removed from the picture. At 3:45, he texted Sarah a prearranged signal indicating potential trouble, then straightened his tie and headed to Vernon's office with the confident stride of a man with nothing to hide. Vernon wasn't alone. A stone-faced man in an expensive suit occupied one of the visitor chairs, clearly not a Heartland employee. "Reynolds, meet Michael Reeves," Vernon said without preamble. "He's a specialist in corporate security. Background checks are standard for executive positions," Marcus commented casually, settling into the remaining chair. Though usually conducted before hiring, Vernon's tight smile didn't reach his eyes. Sometimes certain discrepancies might only become apparent after the fact. Michael Reeves opened a folder on his lap. "Mr. Reynolds, we've been unable to verify your employment history at Wainwright Financial or Denholm Consulting." Marcus had anticipated this possibility. His cover identities always included vulnerabilities that could be explained away if discovered. "I'm not surprised. Both were private consulting arrangements under confidentiality agreements. My clients preferred discretion regarding their financial restructuring." "Convenient," Vernon observed coldly. "Necessary," Marcus countered. "High-net-worth clients and corporations engaged in sensitive financial maneuvers don't publicize their consultants. I'm sure you can appreciate the need for discretion in our line of work." Vernon exchanged glances with Reeves before continuing. "There's also the matter of your Harvard Business School credentials. They have no record of a Jason Reynolds graduating in the years you claimed." This was more serious, a direct contradiction rather than a verification gap. Marcus leaned forward slightly, allowing irritation to show. "My attendance at Harvard's executive education program wouldn't appear in standard graduate records. It was a specialized certification course, not a degree program." The partial truth, that such programs existed and were difficult to verify, provided just enough plausibility to create doubt about Reeves's findings. "And Wharton?" Vernon pressed. "Similar arrangement. Professional development rather than degree seeking." Marcus maintained direct eye contact, projecting calm confidence. "Vernon, what's this really about? You've seen my work firsthand. Are my results suddenly inadequate?" It was a calculated redirection, appealing to Vernon's focus on outcomes over process. The slight shift in Vernon's expression suggested it had landed effectively. "Your results have been acceptable," Vernon acknowledged. "But certain concerns have been raised about your frequent meetings with Ellen Porter and your unusual interest in historical acquisition records." Now they reached the real issue. Marcus had been careless in his evidence gathering, allowing his meetings with Ellen to establish a pattern suspicious enough to trigger Vernon's paranoia. Ellen Porter has 40 years of institutional knowledge that's invaluable for financial restructuring, Marcus explained smoothly. As for acquisition records, Understanding historical patterns is essential for maximizing future opportunities. I assumed that's precisely why you hired me. Vernon studied him for a long moment. What's your assessment of the Daniels farm situation? The abrupt change of subject was a test, one Marcus had prepared for. Their operational loan rejection is proceeding as planned. Without spring planting capital, they'll have no choice but to sell. The property adjoins 3 parcels already under Heartland control, creating a contiguous block that significantly increases overall valuation for potential buyers. Vernon's expression remained suspicious, but Marcus detected slight relaxation in his posture. And your meetings with Ellen outside the office? Security footage shows you at her home multiple evenings last week. Marcus allowed a calculated look of embarrassment to cross his face. That's personal, Vernon. Ellen's been assisting me with more than just financial records. She's been introducing me to certain community members who might facilitate my long-term integration into Millfield. Social introductions? Vernon's skepticism was evident. Let's just say Ellen believes a man in my position should establish proper connections. She's been quite helpful identifying suitable acquaintances. Marcus let the implication of romantic interests hang in the air. Knowing Vernon's inherent sexism would make such trivial motivations seem plausible. The strategy worked. Vernon's suspicion visibly decreased. I see. Still, given the sensitive nature of our current phase, perhaps these social activities should wait until after the acquisition is complete. Of course, Marcus agreed readily. My focus remains on maximizing Heartland's valuation for the sale. Vernon nodded, apparently satisfied for the moment. Good. Now, about the Henderson foreclosure. I'd like to accelerate the timeline. Their property is particularly attractive to our corporate buyers. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, with Marcus carefully balancing cooperation on non-essential matters while finding subtle ways to delay the most damaging actions against farmers in their network. When he finally left Vernon's office, the immediate crisis seemed averted, but Marcus harbored no illusions that his cover remained secure. Vernon would be watching him more closely now, verifying his activities, perhaps even having him followed. Their timeline for gathering evidence and building their case had just been dramatically shortened. Outside Heartland's offices, Marcus drove several blocks before pulling over and texting Sarah, meeting over, cover intact, but compromised. Need to accelerate. Usual place, 8 p.m. As he waited for her acknowledgement, Marcus noticed a dark sedan that had followed him from Heartland now parked at a discreet distance. Vernon wasn't wasting any time establishing surveillance. Changing tactics immediately, Marcus drove to the local hardware store, made a show of purchasing home repair supplies, then proceeded to his rental house where he ostentatiously began working on visible projects in the front yard. The sedan remained parked down the street, its occupant presumably reporting his mundane activities. At 7:30, Marcus entered his house, turned on all the lights, and positioned a hat rack with coat near a window where its shadow suggested a person moving around inside. Then he slipped out the back door, cut through neighboring yards, and made his way to Ellen's house through a route impossible to monitor without multiple surveillance teams. Sarah, James, and Ellen were already waiting, concern evident on their faces. Vernon's had my background investigated, Marcus explained without preamble. I deflected his immediate suspicions, but he's having me watched. How bad is it? Sarah asked. Bad enough that we need to accelerate everything. Vernon's specifically, targeting the Henderson farm for immediate foreclosure. We have weeks, not months. James shook his head grimly. The Hendersons can't hold out that long without operating capital. They won't have to, Marcus assured him. I've been building contingency plans for this scenario. Ellen, has your nephew made contact with the federal prosecutors? Ellen nodded. Jason is cautiously interested but needs more concrete evidence connecting Senator Harrington to Meridian and documenting the full scope of the fraud. I can provide that, Marcus confirmed. But we need to move quickly. Once Vernon realizes I'm actively working against him, he'll start destroying evidence and pressuring potential witnesses. What about your surveillance tail? Sarah asked practically. I can manage periodic evasion, but we need to establish more secure communication channels. Burner phones, digital dead drops, rotating meeting locations. Marcus turned to Ellen. Your role is particularly vulnerable given Vernon's suspicions about our meetings. I've survived in that viper's nest for 40 years. Ellen replied with surprising steel. I can handle Vernon's scrutiny a bit longer. They spent the next hour establishing emergency protocols, contingency plans, and secure methods for sharing evidence. As the meeting concluded, Marcus realized he needed to warn them about the personal risk they were now facing. Vernon isn't just a white-collar criminal, he said soberly. The more threatened he feels, the more dangerous he becomes. We need to consider personal security measures for everyone involved, especially those with families. His gaze met Sarah's, the unspoken concern for Emma hanging between them. We won't be intimidated, Sarah stated firmly, though Marcus detected the slight tension in her voice. We've lived under Heartland's shadow for years. At least now we're fighting back. As Marcus prepared to leave through Ellen's back door, Sarah followed him onto the porch. There's something you're not telling us about today's meeting with Vernon. Her perception was becoming unnervingly accurate. Just calculating the odds, Marcus deflected. Determining how much time we have before my cover completely unravels. And those odds, less favorable than I'd like, he admitted. Vernon's suspicious, but not yet certain. Each day I maintain access to Heartland systems gives us more ammunition. Sarah studied him in the porch light. Be careful, Marcus. This isn't just about evidence anymore. You've become important to people here. The simple statement affected him more profoundly than it should have. In 15 years of cons, Marcus had never allowed himself to become important to anyone. Maintaining emotional distance was fundamental to his survival strategy. I should go, he said, uncomfortable with the direction of his thoughts. My shadow will get suspicious if the lights stay on in my empty house too long. Sarah nodded, but caught his arm as he turned to leave. Promise me you won't take unnecessary risks just to maintain your cover. The evidence we already have is worth more than any additional documents. What she was really saying, Marcus realized, was that his safety mattered more than the perfect case against Heartland. The notion was both foreign and strangely warming. I promise, he said, meaning it despite himself. As Marcus made his circuitous way back to his rental house, evading the sedan still parked on his street, he confronted an uncomfortable truth. For the first time in his career, he was genuinely committed to something beyond self-interest. And that commitment was making him vulnerable in ways his carefully constructed defenses had never anticipated. The question was whether that vulnerability would prove to be his downfall or his salvation. The urgent knocking came at 2 a.m., jolting Marcus from restless sleep. Instantly alert, he approached the door cautiously, years of self-preservation making him check for potential threats before opening it. Sarah stood on his porch, rain-soaked and visibly distraught. They've accelerated everything, she said without preamble as he ushered her inside. The bank just sent an emergency notice. Our loan has been called due in full by end of business tomorrow. Marcus processed this with growing alarm. That's not possible. Even with Vernon's influence, there are regulatory procedures. They're claiming material misrepresentation on the original application. Sarah interrupted, her voice tight with controlled panic. It's completely fabricated, but it gives them legal grounds for immediate collection. Let me see the notice. Sarah handed him a wrinkled paper pulled from her rain jacket. Marcus scanned it quickly, his expertise in financial manipulation immediately recognizing the strategy. This is Vernon's work, he confirmed grimly. He's using the bank to circumvent normal foreclosure timelines. Without immediate payment, they'll initiate seizure procedures within 72 hours. We don't have the money, Sarah stated flatly. Every liquid asset is already committed to spring planting. Marcus calculated rapidly. How much do you need to satisfy the immediate demand? $217,000. Might as well be $2 million. There's no way. I can get it, Marcus interrupted, the decision made before he fully processed its implications. Sarah stared at him in confusion. How? A bank loan would take days, and no legitimate lender would. I have resources, Marcus said carefully. Offshore accounts not connected to my current identity. Understanding dawned in her eyes. From your previous work, yes. The silence between them grew heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, Sarah asked the obvious. Why would you do this? That money is your security. Your escape plan. It was a question Marcus had been avoiding even in his own thoughts. Using his emergency funds, painstakingly accumulated over years of cons, for someone else's benefit violated every principle of self-preservation he'd lived by. Because this matters, he said simply. What Vernon's doing is wrong. What you're fighting for is right. Sarah studied him with those perceptive blue eyes that seemed to see more than he intended to reveal. There's something you're not telling me. Marcus recognized the moment had arrived. the inevitable reckoning he'd been postponing since discovering his personal connection to Heartland's corruption. If he was committing his financial resources to this fight, Sarah deserved the complete truth about who she was partnering with. "You should sit down," he suggested, gesturing to his small living room. "This will take some explaining." Over the next hour, Marcus revealed the full truth of his life as a confidence man, not the sanitized version he'd previously shared, but the detailed reality of a career built on deception and exploitation. "I don't target innocent people," he clarified as Sarah listened in stunned silence. "My marks are always corrupt organizations or individuals who've already harmed others. But that doesn't change the fundamental nature of what I do." "Which is?" Sarah prompted. "I lie. I manipulate. I steal," Marcus stated bluntly. "I justify it as a form of justice, taking from those who've taken from others. But ultimately, I profit from other people's corruption rather than stopping it." "And Heartland? Was this always just another con?" "Initially, yes," Marcus admitted. "I identified them as a potentially lucrative target, corrupt, flush with illegitimate cash, and overconfident. I planned to create a fictitious investment opportunity, convince Vernon to transfer funds offshore, then disappear with several $1,000,000. Sarah absorbed this, her expression unreadable. "What changed?" "Everything," Marcus said quietly. "Ellen's principled resistance, the community's struggle against forces designed to destroy them, your determination to preserve something meaningful beyond mere profit." He hesitated before adding the final piece. "And learning that my family's farm was one of Heartland's first victims. That my father didn't fail through bad luck or poor management, but through deliberate predation." Sarah's eyes widened at this confirmation. "So your commitment to exposing Heartland isn't just about helping us?" "No," Marcus acknowledged. "There's an element of personal vengeance involved. But it's become more than that." "How can I possibly trust you now?" Sarah asked, the hurt evident in her voice. "How do I know this isn't just another elaborate con?" It was the question Marcus had dreaded most, partly because he recognized its legitimacy, and partly because he wasn't entirely sure of the answer himself. "You can't know for certain," he admitted. "Trust requires evidence over time, and I've spent 15 years ensuring people never see the real me. All I can tell you is that helping you, helping this community, feels like the first honest thing I've done since I was 17. Sarah stood abruptly, pacing his small living room. "You were going to steal from the co-op and disappear, leaving all of us still trapped in their system, even knowing what they did to your own family. Your initial plan was to profit rather than seek justice." The accusation stung partly because of its accuracy. "Yes, and now I'm supposed to believe you've had some moral awakening? That you're suddenly willing to sacrifice your own interest for others?" "Not suddenly," Marcus corrected. "Gradually. Reluctantly. Sometimes even resentfully. But yes, that's what's happened." The raw honesty seemed to reach her. Sarah's anger softened slightly. "The money you're offering, is it stolen?" "Technically, yes," Marcus admitted. "But from organizations like Heartland, predatory institutions that acquired it through fraudulent means in the first place. So it's twice stolen." Sarah observed with bitter irony. "I prefer to think of it as redistributed justice." Marcus attempted a small smile that faded under her stern gaze. Sarah resumed her pacing, clearly struggling with the implications of his confession. "Even if I wanted to accept your offer, it doesn't solve the underlying problem. Vernon would just find another mechanism to target us. The money buys us time," Marcus explained. "Enough to complete building our case and present it to federal authorities before Vernon can regroup." "And you're willing to sacrifice your emergency funds for this? Funds I'm guessing represent your only safety net?" Marcus nodded. "I can transfer the money through channels that can't be traced to either of us. The bank will have no choice but to honor the loan payment." Sarah stopped pacing, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortably aware of how much her opinion had come to matter to him. "Why tell me all this now?" she asked finally. "You could have made the transfer without revealing your past." "Because deception has consequences," Marcus said quietly. "I've spent my adult life lying to everyone, including myself, about the nature of what I do. If I'm going to help you, really help you, not just pull another con, it has to be based on truth." The vulnerability in this admission hung between them, disrupting the careful emotional distance Marcus had maintained his entire career. Sarah sank back onto the couch, the weight of both their situation and his revelations evident in her posture. "I don't know how to reconcile the man who's been helping us with the con artist you're describing. They're both me, Marcus acknowledged. I can't erase my past or suddenly become someone else, but I can choose to use my skills differently. Going forward, and after this is over, assuming we succeed in exposing Heartland, what then? Back to running cons? The question caught Marcus off guard. He'd been so focused on the immediate battle that he hadn't considered what would follow. The thought of returning to his former life, the isolation, the perpetual deception, the emotional detachment, suddenly felt hollow in ways it never had before. I don't know, he admitted. For the first time in my life, I'm not planning 3 steps ahead. The honesty of this uncertainty seemed to reach Sarah more effectively than any calculated assurance could have. Her expression softened slightly. I need time to process all this, she said finally, rising to leave. But we don't have time, do we? The bank notice demands payment by tomorrow. I'll make the transfer regardless of your decision about working with me, Marcus assured her. Your farm won't be lost because of Vernon's manipulation. Sarah paused at the door, studying him with those disconcertingly perceptive eyes. You know what's strangest about all this? Despite everything you've just told me, I still believe you're a better man than you think you are. Before Marcus could respond to this unexpected assessment, she was gone, leaving him alone with the uncomfortable weight of his past and the uncertain promise of a different future he'd never anticipated wanting. Morning found Marcus executing the complex financial maneuvers necessary to transfer funds to Sarah's bank without creating traceable connections. Years of developing untraceable payment channels for his cons now served a purpose he'd never anticipated: saving a family farm rather than enriching himself. By noon, he'd confirmed the transfer had been processed and accepted by the bank. Sarah's immediate financial crisis was averted, though Marcus harbored no illusions that Vernon would simply accept this setback. The acceleration of foreclosure proceedings against the Daniels farm indicated Vernon was specifically targeting their most vocal opponents, which meant time was running out for their entire network. In his Heartland office, Marcus maintained his cover by visibly working on acquisition projections while actually documenting evidence of systematic fraud. Vernon's surveillance had intensified. Marcus noticed Robert Klein making unconvincing casual passes by his office, every 30 minutes clearly reporting on his activities. Reynolds. Vernon appeared in his doorway unexpectedly. Join me for lunch. The board wants an update on our final phase preparations. The invitation wasn't optional. Marcus followed Vernon to Millfield's only upscale restaurant, where 3 board members waited in a private dining room. The conversation remained superficially professional, but Marcus detected the underlying scrutiny in their questions about his progress. The Daniels foreclosure has encountered a temporary setback, Vernon informed the group with barely concealed irritation. Somehow they acquired funds to satisfy the immediate loan demand. Unexpected, commented William Harris, the board chairman. Family assistance, perhaps? We're investigating the source, Vernon replied, his gaze settling on Marcus. The delay is unfortunate but not critical to our timeline. Alternative measures are being implemented. The implied threat wasn't subtle. Whatever Vernon had planned for the Daniels farm, it went beyond financial pressure. Speaking of timelines, Marcus interjected smoothly, the corporate buyers have requested comprehensive documentation of all acquisition methods prior to finalizing terms. Standard due diligence. Vernon's eyes narrowed slightly. You've been in contact with the corporate representatives? They reached out directly yesterday, Marcus lied confidently. Apparently, they're concerned about potential liability issues related to acquisition practices. I assured them everything is fully compliant with applicable regulations. The subtle warning had its intended effect. Vernon and the board exchanged uneasy glances. Perhaps we should review our documentation procedures, suggested Harris carefully. Ensure everything is appropriately presented. Exactly my thinking, Marcus agreed. A thorough internal audit before external review would be prudent. I'll handle any communication with the buyers, Vernon stated firmly, reasserting control. Your focus should remain on optimizing our financial position. Of course, Marcus conceded, having achieved his objective, planting the seed that outside scrutiny was imminent, potentially prompting more cautious behavior during the critical weeks ahead. The strategy was a calculated risk. Vernon might become more careful in his illegal activities, but he might also accelerate efforts to remove potential liabilities, including Marcus himself, if his suspicions continued to grow. After lunch, Marcus returned to Heartland with a clear sense that his time as CFO was running short. Vernon's scrutiny was intensifying, and the unexpected payment of the Daniels loan had likely heightened his paranoia. Using Vernon's absence from the office, Marcus implemented the next phase of his evidence gathering, accessing the restricted server containing communication between Heartland and Senator Harrington. The digital security was sophisticated, but designed to prevent external hacking rather than internal access by someone with executive credentials. Within an hour, Marcus had downloaded hundreds of incriminating documents, emails, financial transfers, property acquisition strategies explicitly designed to devalue agricultural land before purchase. Most damning were direct communications between Vernon and Harrington, discussing how to use the senator's position to block regulatory oversight of Heartland's practices. As Marcus encrypted these files and prepared to transfer them to a secure, external location, Klein appeared at his door looking even more nervous than usual. "Vernon's called an emergency executive meeting for 5 p.m., he whispered. "He's bringing in someone from Meridian. They're talking about security concerns and potential breaches." Marcus nodded calmly despite the internal alarm. "Thanks for the heads up." After Klein departed, Marcus accelerated his timeline. The emergency meeting could only mean one thing. Vernon was preparing to restrict access or possibly eliminate perceived threats. The confrontation Marcus had been postponing was now imminent. He sent a coded text to Sarah, Ellen, and James activating their emergency protocols. Then he systematically transferred all accumulated evidence to secure digital locations accessible to their network, regardless of what happened to him personally. As he completed these preparations, Marcus received a response from Sarah. "Meeting at Safe House 3, 8 p.m. Bring everything." Safe House 3 was the Miller farm, the most remote location in their network, chosen specifically for situations requiring maximum security. The instruction to bring everything confirmed Sarah's assessment of the danger. She was telling him to assume he wouldn't be returning to his Heartland office. At precisely 4:45, 15 minutes before the emergency meeting, Marcus executed the final component of his contingency plan. Using his CFO access, he initiated a comprehensive digital backup of Heartland's entire financial system, ostensibly for disaster recovery purposes, but actually creating an unalterable record of their fraudulent practices. Then, leaving his office as if for a brief break, Marcus walked calmly through Heartland's main entrance, nodded to the receptionist, and never looked back. By the time Vernon realized Marcus had abandoned the emergency meeting, the evidence was already secured, beyond Heartland's reach. 2 hours later, the core members of their network gathered at the Miller farm. Ellen, James, Sarah, Allison Miller, and representatives from 5 other farming families listened intently as Marcus outlined what he'd discovered and what would likely happen next. "Vernon knows something's wrong," he explained, connecting his laptop to a projector set up in the Miller's living room. "He's called in Meridian representatives, which means he's preparing for some kind of decisive action." "What kind of action?" James asked worriedly. "Based on the communications I accessed today, they're considering accelerating the corporate sale and implementing what they call liability mitigation, which could mean anything from destroying evidence to more aggressive measures against perceived threats." Sarah's expression hardened. "Like what happened to Frank Miller." Allison Miller flinched at her late husband's name. "You think they'd go that far again?" "I think Vernon's desperate," Marcus replied carefully. The unexpected payment of the Daniels loan, coupled with increasing scrutiny of their practices, has made him paranoid. People like Vernon are most dangerous when they feel cornered. "So what do we do?" Ellen asked. Despite her recent health scare, her determination remained undiminished. Marcus displayed the evidence he'd gathered on the projected screen. "We have enough documentation to prove systematic fraud, manipulated crop values, predatory lending practices, and corrupt influence over regulatory authorities. Most significantly, we have direct communication between Vernon and Senator Harrington, demonstrating criminal conspiracy." The farmers studied the evidence with growing indignation as Marcus explained the technical details in terms they could understand, how their crops had been systematically undervalued, their payments deliberately reduced, their loans structured to create defaults. "This is what we've suspected for years," James said, his voice tight with emotion. "But seeing it documented so clearly, it's not just evidence of what they've done," Marcus continued. "It's proof of what they're planning. Vernon and Meridian intend to sell the consolidated farmland to corporate buyers who will convert much of it to non-agricultural uses, industrial development, commercial properties, even waste disposal facilities in some areas. This revelation shocked even those who had long suspected Heartland's true agenda. The destruction of generations of agricultural heritage for short-term profit struck at the heart of the community's identity. "What exactly are you proposing?" Sarah asked, bringing them back to the immediate question. Marcus outlined the strategy he'd developed, a coordinated approach combining legal action, public exposure, and strategic pressure. First, we file formal complaints with federal authorities, the USDA, FBI Financial Crimes Division, and the SEC, given Senator Harrington's involvement. Ellen's nephew at the U.S. Attorney's Office has agreed to personally ensure these complaints receive proper attention. Second, we prepare for public exposure. I have contacts in financial journalism who can break this story nationally, beyond Vernon's local influence. Once federal investigations begin, more farmers will come forward with their experiences. Finally, we use Vernon's paranoia against him. My abrupt departure will convince him that exposure is imminent. If he follows his established pattern, he'll attempt to destroy evidence and distance himself from direct involvement, actions that will only strengthen the case against him. The farmers exchange glances, weighing the risks against the potential for long-delayed justice. "This won't be easy," Marcus cautioned. "Vernon and his associates will fight back with everything they have. They'll threaten, intimidate, possibly worse. Everyone involved needs to understand the potential consequences. We've lived with their threats for years," Allison Miller said firmly. "At least now we're fighting back." One by one, the farmers voiced their commitment to the plan. As the meeting concluded with assigned responsibilities and communication protocols, Sarah pulled Marcus aside. "You didn't return to your house," she observed. "You knew Vernon would have someone waiting." Marcus nodded. "Once I missed that emergency meeting, my cover was completely blown. I can't go back there. Where will you stay?" The question highlighted a reality Marcus had been avoiding. For the first time in his career, he had no exit strategy, no carefully prepared escape plan. His financial resources were committed to saving Sarah's farm, and his usual practice of disappearing at the first sign of danger was no longer an option. "I haven't figured that out yet," he admitted. Sarah studied him for a moment before simply saying, "Come home with us, we have a spare room." The offer represented a level of trust Marcus knew he hadn't earned despite his recent actions. "Sarah, after everything I told you about my past, I'm still processing all that," she interrupted. "But right now we need to stick together. Safety in numbers." As they drove through the darkness toward the Daniels farm, Marcus confronted an unfamiliar sensation. The weight of responsibility for others' welfare coupled with the unexpected comfort of not facing danger alone. For 15 years, he'd operated as a solitary predator, maintaining complete independence as both a tactical advantage and an emotional defense. Now, almost against his will, he'd become part of something larger than himself. A community fighting for its survival against forces that had once seemed invincible. The transformation was as terrifying as it was liberating. Dawn broke over the Daniels farm as Marcus finalized his strategy at the kitchen table. After a restless night in the spare bedroom, too aware of Sarah and Emma sleeping just down the hall, he'd risen early to coordinate the next critical phase. "You haven't slept," Sarah observed, entering the kitchen in worn jeans and a flannel shirt. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face free of makeup yet striking in the morning light. "Too much to organize," Marcus replied, gesturing at his laptop where he'd been drafting formal complaints for federal authorities. "Vernon will be moving quickly now." Sarah started coffee brewing before joining him at the table. "Any word from Ellen?" She texted an hour ago. "Vernon called an emergency board meeting for this morning. He's implementing what he calls containment protocols, which basically means destroying evidence and silencing potential witnesses. Will that work? Destroying evidence? Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Not when I've already secured comprehensive backups of everything. In fact, his attempts to cover up will only strengthen the case against him. Sarah studied the formal complaints on his screen. These look impressive. Very legal. I've had experience with federal investigations, Marcus admitted. From the other side, obviously. Obviously, Sarah echoed with a hint of the wariness that had returned since his confession. Though she'd offered him shelter, the trust between them remained fragile, complicated by both his past and their current circumstances. James Daniels joined them, moving stiffly but purposefully despite his cane. Ellen called. Vernon's people were at her house last night. claiming they needed to secure sensitive documents for an audit. Did they find anything? Marcus asked sharply. Nothing important. Ellen's been keeping the critical evidence at her sister's house in the next county. James poured himself coffee. But it confirms they're actively searching for documentation. We should assume they'll come here next. Let them, Sarah said with unexpected ferocity. This is private property. They have no right. They'll manufacture a reason. Marcus interrupted gently. A bank inspection related to your loan, a county assessment, something that sounds legitimate. So what do we do? Sarah asked. Hide everything? No, Marcus said, an idea forming rapidly. We set a trap. Over breakfast, Marcus outlined his strategy while Emma cheerfully demolished pancakes, blissfully unaware of the adults' tense conversation. The plan was audacious but built on Marcus's deep understanding of how people like Vernon operated. Financial predators like Vernon succeed because they control the narrative, Marcus explained. We need to force them to reveal their true nature, while creating undeniable evidence. By mid-morning, their preparations were complete. Marcus had coached Sarah and James on exactly what to say and do when Vernon's representatives arrived. Ellen had been briefed on her role and Allison Miller had agreed to serve as an independent witness. They didn't have to wait long. Shortly before noon, a black SUV and a county sheriff's vehicle pulled into the farm's driveway. Vernon himself emerged from the SUV accompanied by a man in an expensive suit. The sheriff, clearly uncomfortable, followed reluctantly. Game time, Marcus murmured, retreating to the study where he could monitor everything through the security system he'd hastily installed that morning. Sarah and James went to meet their unwelcome visitors on the porch. Ms. Daniels, Vernon greeted with artificial cordiality. I apologize for the unannounced visit, but we have concerns about potential agricultural violations that could affect your loan compliance. Sarah feigned confusion. What violations? Our operation is fully compliant with all regulations. We've received reports of improper chemical storage. Vernon lied smoothly. As your primary lender, Heartland has both the right and responsibility to inspect for regulatory compliance. He gestured to the suited man beside him. This is Michael Reeves, our compliance officer, and Sheriff Braddock is here to ensure everything proceeds appropriately. The sheriff looked distinctly unhappy with his role. Ms. Daniels, they do have inspection rights under your loan agreement, but you're entitled to be present throughout the process. Of course, Sarah agreed with the rehearsed response Marcus had suggested. I'm happy to cooperate with a legitimate inspection. Would you like to start with the equipment barn? We keep all our agricultural supplies there. Vernon seemed momentarily taken aback by her cooperation. Yes, that would be appropriate. As the group moved toward the barn, Marcus monitored their conversation through the discreet recording devices he'd placed around the property. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Vernon was growing increasingly frustrated as his pretense of a legitimate inspection failed to provide access to what he really sought. Perhaps we should examine your office records as well, Vernon finally suggested. Proper documentation of chemical applications is required by state regulations. Certainly, Sarah agreed pleasantly, though I believe most of that information was already provided to Heartland as part of our recent loan review. How strange that you would need to verify it again so soon. Vernon's expression tightened at this pointed observation. Procedures change. Compliance requirements evolve. In the farm office, a small room off the main house, Sarah retrieved the files Vernon had requested while James engaged Sheriff Braddock in conversation about his family, creating the distraction Marcus had suggested. Is there something specific you're looking for, Mr. Stillwell? Sarah asked innocently. You seem concerned about more than just chemical storage. The trap was set. Now they needed Vernon to reveal his true purpose. While we're here, Vernon said with forced casualness, we should also review any communication you might have had with our former CFO, Jason Reynolds. He's under investigation for corporate espionage. And there it was. The real reason for this surprise inspection. Jason Reynolds? Sarah feigned surprise. The consultant who's been working with Heartland? What kind of espionage? That's confidential, Vernon replied curtly. But any documents or electronic communications from him would be relevant to our investigation. I don't recall having any documentation from Mr. Reynolds, Sarah said truthfully. Marcus had been careful to leave no paper trail. Though he did attend some community events, is he in some kind of trouble? Vernon's patience visibly thinned. Ms. Daniels, we have reason to believe Reynolds has been gathering confidential information with the intent to damage Heartland's operations. As a cooperative member, this affects your interests as well. How exactly would exposing Heartland's operations damage my interests? Sarah asked, the calculated innocence in her voice pushing Vernon exactly where Marcus had predicted. This isn't about exposure. It's about misrepresentation, Vernon snapped, his facade of professional concern cracking. Reynolds has been making baseless accusations about our business practices. What kind of accusations? Sarah pressed. Vernon's composure slipped further. Ridiculous claims about payment calculations, loan terms, property acquisitions, all standard business practices being twisted into something sinister. So Heartland's standard business practices include manipulating crop weights, falsifying quality assessments, and structuring loans to create defaults? Sarah asked, quoting directly from the evidence they'd gathered. The blood drained from Vernon's face as he realized the trap he'd walked into. That's absolutely false. Where did you hear such defamatory nonsense? It's interesting that you immediately knew exactly what allegations I was referring to, Sarah observed calmly. I didn't specify any details. Sheriff Braddock had stopped his conversation with James, now listening intently to the exchange. This is outrageous, Vernon blustered, turning to the sheriff. I want this woman charged with defamation. Defamation requires false statements, Mr. Stillwell, James interjected. Truth is an absolute defense, and we have considerable evidence supporting these allegations. Vernon's expression darkened dangerously. Whatever Reynolds has told you is fabricated. He's a fraud with no credibility. We're not just relying on Mr. Reynolds, Sarah countered. We have documentation spanning decades of Heartland's systematic fraud against member farmers. Documentation that's been delivered to federal authorities this morning. This was the moment Marcus had been waiting for. Vernon's reaction to learning his scheme was exposed. Through the security monitor, he watched as Vernon's calculated professional demeanor completely collapsed. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Vernon hissed. All pretense abandoned. People who challenge Heartland have a way of encountering unfortunate accidents. Ask Allison Miller about her husband's tractor malfunction. The threat was explicit and captured perfectly by the recording devices. Even Sheriff Braddock looked shocked by the naked intimidation. Are you threatening Miss Daniels? The sheriff asked, his discomfort with the situation finally overridden by the blatant criminality. I'm stating facts, Vernon replied coldly. Small. Farms are dying because they're inefficient and obsolete. Fighting the inevitable only leads to personal tragedy. I believe this inspection is concluded, Sarah said firmly. Unless you have an actual warrant, Sheriff Braddock, I'd like these men to leave my property immediately. The sheriff nodded, clearly relieved to end his involvement. Mr. Stillwell, we should go. This has gone beyond a routine inspection. Vernon hesitated, visibly calculating his options before turning to leave. At the door, he paused to deliver a final warning. This isn't over, Ms. Daniels. Meridian Agricultural Holdings protects its investments vigorously. Your family has been a persistent irritant that will now be addressed permanently. After they departed, Marcus emerged from the study, already downloading the recorded conversation to secure storage. That went even better than expected. Vernon explicitly threatened. Ewan implicated himself in Frank Miller's death. I thought the sheriff was going to arrest him right there, James said, shaking his head in disbelief. Braddock's not corrupt, just cautious, Marcus explained. He won't move against Vernon without overwhelming evidence, but he won't actively help him either, especially after witnessing that threat. Sarah sank into a chair, the adrenaline of the confrontation draining away. What happens now? Now we accelerate everything, Marcus replied, already typing rapidly on his laptop. Vernon will be moving quickly to contain the damage, destroying evidence, pressuring potential witnesses, possibly worse. We need to ensure the federal complaints are fast-tracked and the evidence is secured beyond his reach. And us? Sarah asked quietly. That threat wasn't subtle. Marcus met her concerned gaze directly. We implement immediate security protocols. No one goes anywhere alone. The farm needs constant monitoring. Emma stays with trusted family until this is resolved. The mention of her daughter snapped Sarah to full alertness. You think she's in danger? I think Vernon's desperate, which makes him unpredictable, Marcus answered honestly. We take no chances with anyone's safety, especially Emma's. James nodded agreement. My brother's place in Cedar Rapids. Sarah's cousin teaches at the school there. Emma would enjoy it as a special visit. Sarah's instinctive resistance to being separated from her daughter showed briefly before practicality prevailed. I'll call Amy today. Emma can be there by evening. As they finalized safety arrangements, Marcus received an urgent text from Ellen. V just announced corporate sale finalized. New owners take control in 72 hours. All evidence being archived immediately. Vernon's accelerating everything. Marcus informed them grimly. He's trying to complete the corporate sale before our evidence reaches the right authorities, creating legal barriers to prosecution. Can he do that? James asked worriedly. Not effectively, Marcus assured him. The evidence trail is too comprehensive. And Ellen's nephew at the U.S. Attorney's Office is personally expediting our complaints. But Vernon doesn't know that. He thinks he's still controlling the situation. So we let him believe that? Sarah questioned. Marcus nodded, a strategy already forming. In fact, we're going to help him believe it. Vernon's greatest vulnerability right now is his overconfidence, his certainty that he can still outmaneuver us. How do we use that? James asked. We let him think he's winning, Marcus explained, the tactics coming naturally after years of similar cons. We create an opportunity that's too tempting for him to resist, one that will lead him to make critical mistakes. Sarah studied him with newfound appreciation. You're setting another trap, the biggest one yet, Marcus confirmed. Vernon thinks he's hunting us, but he's about to become the prey. As they outlined this final strategy, Marcus recognized the irony. After 15 years of elaborate cons targeting corrupt organizations, his most important operation was now against exactly the kind of predator he'd once emulated. The distinction felt significant in ways he was still struggling to fully comprehend. What had begun as a standard financial con had evolved into something he'd never anticipated, a genuine fight for justice, with stakes far more personal than mere profit. The transformation left Marcus in unfamiliar territory, navigating by principles he'd long dismissed as naive and impractical. Yet somehow, this unfamiliar path felt more authentic than any he'd walked before. The final phase began with a seemingly innocuous email. Using an untraceable account, Marcus contacted Vernon with a simple message. Interested in discussing mutual benefit regarding recent Heartland developments. Evidence can disappear for the right price. The bait was perfectly calibrated to Vernon's expectations. A mercenary former employee looking to profit rather than pursue justice. Within hours, Vernon had responded with a cautious expression of interest. He's hooked, Marcus informed the group gathered at the Miller farm, their new operational base. Now we reel him in slowly. Over the next 24 hours, Marcus carefully cultivated Vernon's belief that he was negotiating with a simple opportunist. Each exchange revealed just enough authentic information to be credible while concealing their true strategy. I've suggested a meeting to exchange evidence for payment, Marcus explained as Sarah, James, Ellen, and Allison reviewed the correspondence. Vernon's proposed his lake house tomorrow night. Isolated, controlled territory. That's too dangerous. Sarah objected immediately. After his explicit threat at the farm, you can't possibly meet him alone. I won't be alone, Marcus assured her. And I won't actually be meeting him. The plan was intricate but built on Marcus's deep understanding of how people like Vernon operated. They would use his expectation of a simple blackmail exchange to expose the entire operation in a way impossible to contain. While these preparations proceeded, Ellen's nephew Jason had been navigating the federal bureaucracy with remarkable efficiency. By the following morning, he reported that multiple agencies had opened formal investigations based on their evidence. FBI Financial Crimes Division is particularly interested in the connections to Senator Harrington, Jason informed them during a secure call. They've been building a case against him for years but lacked the direct evidence you've provided. How soon before they move against Vernon and Heartland? Marcus asked. These investigations take time to coordinate, Jason cautioned. Probably a week before any official action. Marcus exchanged glances with Sarah. That's too long. Vernon's corporate sale finalizes in less than 48 hours. Once that happens, the money disappears offshore, and liability becomes fragmented across multiple entities. I've emphasized the urgency, Jason assured them. But federal agencies have procedures they won't circumvent, even for compelling evidence. After the call ended, Marcus turned to the group. We proceed with our plan. The federal investigation is our insurance policy, but we need to force immediate action. By early afternoon, Marcus had finalized arrangements for what Vernon believed would be a straightforward blackmail exchange. The lake house meeting was set for 9 p.m., selected specifically because it coincided with a local news broadcast. Marcus's contact in financial journalism, a reporter named Rachel Chen who specialized in exposing corporate fraud, had agreed to air a special report on Heartland's corruption that evening. The timing wasn't coincidental. Vernon will be focused on containing what he thinks is a simple blackmail attempt, Marcus explained. He won't expect a comprehensive public exposure simultaneously. As evening approached, Marcus prepared for his role while Sarah coordinated with the network of farmers who would serve as witnesses at strategic locations. James and Ellen established a command center at the Miller farm, monitoring communications and ready to alert authorities if necessary. "You're sure this will work?" Sarah asked as she helped Marcus set up the specialized equipment he'd acquired through his less legitimate connections. "Vernon believes he's in control," Marcus replied. "That's his critical vulnerability. When people like Vernon think they're winning, they get careless." At precisely 8:30 p.m., Marcus activated the final component of their plan. Using Vernon's CFO credentials, which remarkably still functioned despite his abrupt departure, he initiated a remote system access that would monitor all Heartland communications in real time. "They never revoked my access," Marcus noted with satisfaction. Another example of Vernon's overconfidence. By 8:45, Marcus was parked in a concealed location near Vernon's lake house, monitoring the property through high-powered optics. Vernon had arrived early, accompanied by Michael Reeves and two men whose builds and postures screamed private security. 4 targets confirmed, Marcus reported via secure communication to the team. "Vernon's not planning a negotiation. He's planning an ambush." "Abort," Sarah responded immediately. "It's too dangerous." "Negative," Marcus countered. "This confirms he's desperate. We proceed as planned." At 8:55, Marcus sent Vernon a text message. "Approaching your location. Coming by boat to avoid road. Surveillance. Dock access in 10 minutes. The deception worked perfectly. Vernon and his security team repositioned toward the dock, away from the road where Marcus had arranged the actual surprise. At precisely 9 p.m., 3 vehicles turned into Vernon's driveway. A local news van, Sheriff Braddock's patrol car, and a sedan containing Ellen's nephew Jason, alongside a federal agent who had been convinced to observe unofficially. Simultaneously, Rachel Chen's special report began broadcasting across the region. "Tonight we expose systematic fraud at the Heartland Agricultural Cooperative, including evidence of corrupt influence extending to State Senator William Harrington." Through his monitoring equipment, Marcus watched Vernon's reaction as he received multiple panicked phone calls, while simultaneously confronting unexpected visitors at his front door. The carefully constructed facade of legitimate business collapsed. In real time, as Sheriff Braddock presented a warrant to search the premises based on evidence of criminal threats against Sarah Daniels. "It's working," Marcus reported to the team as Vernon visibly unraveled, shouting at his security team while trying to prevent Sheriff Braddock from entering the house. Vernon's completely off balance. The coup de grace came when Jason and the federal agent approached, presenting Vernon with formal notice of multiple federal investigations. Though they lacked authority to arrest him immediately, their presence confirmed the investigation had moved beyond Vernon's sphere of influence. As Vernon retreated into his house with his legal team hastily summoned by phone, Marcus continued, monitoring the chaos through Heartland's communication systems. Board members were calling emergency meetings, Senator Harrington's office was issuing denials, and the corporate buyers were demanding explanations. The strategy had worked exactly as planned. By attacking from multiple directions simultaneously, media exposure, local law enforcement, federal investigation, and public witness, they had created a situation Vernon couldn't control through his usual methods of intimidation and corruption. Marcus returned to the Miller farm where the team was watching Rachel Chen's broadcast with a mixture of vindication and disbelief that their fight was finally receiving public attention. "Vernon's trying to implement emergency containment protocols," Marcus reported, showing them the internal Heartland communications he was still monitoring. "But it's too late. The evidence is too widespread, too public." "What about the corporate sale?" James asked anxiously. "Already falling apart," Marcus confirmed with satisfaction. "The buyers have announced they're suspending all acquisition activities pending investigation outcomes." Sarah stepped outside for air, overwhelmed by the sudden momentum after years of seemingly hopeless resistance. Marcus followed, finding her staring at the night sky with complex emotions playing across her face. "It doesn't feel real yet," she said quietly. "After all this time fighting against something that seemed invincible, Vernon's not in custody yet," Marcus cautioned, "and unraveling the full extent of Heartland's corruption will take time." but the critical milestone has been reached. They can't operate in shadows anymore. Sarah turned to him, her expression revealing both gratitude and lingering uncertainty about the complicated man who had catalyzed this transformation. Why does this victory feel like just the beginning rather than the end? Marcus had been asking himself the same question. For 15 years, his cons had concluded with a simple metric: financial gain. This situation offered something more complex and ultimately more meaningful. Because it is just the beginning, he answered truthfully. Exposing corruption is only the first step. Rebuilding what was damaged comes next. As they stood together, watching more news vans arrive in Millfield to cover the unfolding story, neither mentioned the unavoidable question that hung between them. What role, if any, Marcus would play in that rebuilding process? For the first time in his adult life, Marcus found himself wanting to stay rather than disappear once a con concluded. The realization was as terrifying as it was liberating. The aftermath unfolded with breathtaking speed. Within 48 hours of the exposure, federal agents had executed search warrants at Heartland's offices. Senator Harrington had announced a leave of absence pending investigation, and Vernon Stillwell had been taken into custody on initial charges of witness intimidation and financial fraud. Millfield transformed overnight. News vans clogged the main street. Reporters sought interviews with farming families, and previously silent victims of Heartland's predation began coming forward with their stories. The community that had suffered in isolation suddenly found itself at the center of a national conversation about agricultural corruption and rural economic justice. 1 week after the exposure, the farmers gathered at the community center, the same venue where Marcus had first observed the Harvest Festival months earlier. The mood was markedly different now. Cautious optimism replacing resigned desperation. The FBI has confirmed they've frozen Heartland's assets pending investigation, Ellen reported to the assembled group. All foreclosure proceedings have been suspended indefinitely. This announcement brought visible relief to families who had been weeks away from losing generational farms. James Daniels, serving as unofficial moderator, continued with practical matters. The state agricultural department has appointed an interim administrator to maintain essential co-op functions during the investigation. Farmers will still be able to process and sell crops, though the payment structure remains to be determined. Marcus observed this meeting from the back of the room, intentionally maintaining a low profile. Though his role in exposing Heartland had become generally known, he remained uncomfortable with the gratitude directed his way. Nothing in his experience as a con artist had prepared him for being viewed as a community hero. Sarah noticed his discomfort and joined him at his position against the wall. You should be up front with the organizers. None of this would have happened without you. That's not entirely accurate, Marcus replied quietly. You were fighting Heartland before I arrived. I just provided some technical expertise. Sarah's expression made it clear she wasn't accepting this deflection. False modesty doesn't suit you, Marcus. These people know what you did and they're grateful. Allowing them to express that gratitude is part of healing. Before Marcus could respond, James called for attention at the front of the room. We need to discuss the future of Heartland. Federal authorities have indicated that once their investigation concludes, ownership will likely revert to member farmers as originally structured. This announcement generated excited conversation throughout the room. After decades of corruption, the possibility of reclaiming their cooperative seemed almost too good to believe. We'll need leadership during this transition, James continued. A committee of farmers who can work with authorities and eventually establish new operational guidelines. Hands raised throughout the room as people nominated respected community members. The list quickly grew to include many who had been part of their evidence-gathering network. Allison Miller, the Hendersons, several others who had documented Heartland's fraudulent practices. Then, an unexpected voice called from the back, I nominate Marcus Webb. Heads turned to identify the speaker, Ellen Porter, her expression resolute despite the murmurs of surprise her nomination generated. He understands financial systems better than anyone, Ellen continued firmly. He knows exactly how Heartland's corruption functioned, which means he knows how to prevent it from happening again. Marcus stared at her in disbelief. Ellen, I'm not a farmer, she finished for him. Neither am I, but we both care about what happens to this community. James considered the nomination thoughtfully. Mr. Webb's expertise would certainly be valuable during the restructuring. However, given his unconventional background, there might be concerns about his long-term commitment to Millfield. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Marcus, waiting for his response to this diplomatic reference to his past as a con artist. The scrutiny was uncomfortable, but for once in his life, Marcus felt compelled toward complete honesty rather than a calculated performance. "You're right to question my commitment," he acknowledged, addressing the entire room. "Until recently, my life has been defined by temporary engagements and quick exits. I came to Millfield for entirely self-interested reasons, planning to exploit Heartland's corruption rather than expose it." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, though most had already heard versions of this story. "What changed my perspective wasn't some sudden moral awakening," Marcus continued. "It was watching people like Ellen, who spent decades fighting from within a corrupt system, like Allison Miller, who continued her husband's fight for justice despite personal tragedy, like Sarah Daniels, who refused to surrender her family's legacy to predatory interests." He paused, formulating thoughts he'd never articulated even to himself. "For 15 years I justified my cons as a form of justice, taking from corrupt organizations that had already harmed others, but I never stayed to help repair the damage those organizations caused. I never committed to anything beyond my own interests." The room remained silent, farmers listening with unexpected intensity. "I can't claim to deserve your trust," Marcus concluded, "but if you're willing to give me the opportunity, I'd like to help rebuild what Heartland was always meant to be. A true cooperative serving its members rather than exploiting them." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever before being broken by a simple question from one of the older farmers. "Are you staying in Millfield then?" It was the question Marcus had been avoiding since the exposure. His normal pattern would be to disappear once the con concluded, moving to another location, assuming another identity, leaving no connections that could compromise future operations. The logical choice remained unchanged, yet logic no longer seemed adequate for the decision he faced. "Yes," he answered finally, "I'm staying." The simple statement felt more significant than any elaborate deception he'd ever crafted. A commitment made without reservation or hidden agenda, perhaps the first truly honest declaration of his adult life. The farmers exchanged glances, conducting silent deliberations through expressions and nods in the way of people who've known each other for generations. Finally, James spoke for the group. "We'll put it to a vote then. Those in favor of including Marcus Webb on the transition committee?" Hands raised throughout the room, not unanimously but an undeniable majority. Those opposed? A smaller showing, mostly from farmers who had suffered most directly under Heartland's manipulation and remained understandably wary of outsiders. "The majority supports your inclusion," James announced formally. "Welcome to the committee, Mr. Webb." As the meeting continued with discussion of immediate needs and priorities, Marcus found himself experiencing an unfamiliar emotion that took him several minutes to identify: belonging. After 15 years of calculated detachment, he had inadvertently found a community where his skills were valued, not for deception, but for protection. Later, as people dispersed in small conversational groups, Ellen approached him with knowing eyes. "I told you from the beginning that you were different from Vernon's usual recruits. You knew I wasn't really a financial consultant," Marcus observed. "What did you think I was?" "Initially, I thought you might be an undercover investigator," she admitted. "When I realized that wasn't true, I decided you were someone searching for something without realizing what you were actually looking for." The assessment was uncomfortably perceptive. "And now?" Ellen smiled gently. "Now I think you've found it." Before Marcus could respond to this observation, Sarah joined them, Emma at her side. The child had returned from her temporary sanctuary in Cedar Rapids once the immediate danger had passed, bringing renewed energy to the farmhouse where Marcus still occupied the spare room despite his awkward offers to find alternative accommodation. "Mr. Marcus," Emma exclaimed with her usual enthusiasm, "are you going to help fix the co-op?" Her innocent framing of the complex situation made Marcus smile. "I'm going to try, Emma." "Good," she declared with a child's certainty. "Mommy says you're good at fixing broken things." Sarah looked momentarily embarrassed by this revelation before turning the conversation to practical matters. "The committee meets tomorrow morning to establish priorities. I've drafted some initial proposals for restructuring the payment system." As they discussed the technical aspects of cooperative reorganization, Marcus realized how naturally Sarah had assumed he would be involved in rebuilding, not just as a temporary advisor but as a committed participant. Her faith in his transformation seemed both unearned and essential to its reality. Walking back to the Daniels farm that evening, Marcus found himself contemplating a future he had never imagined, one defined by commitment rather than escape, by creation rather than exploitation. The prospect was terrifying in its unfamiliarity, yet compelling in ways his previous life had never been. Having second thoughts about staying? Sarah asked perceptively, as they crossed fields burnished gold by the setting sun, trying to reconcile who I was with who I might become. Marcus admitted. 15 years of habits don't disappear overnight. Sarah considered this thoughtfully. The man who first arrived in Millfield would never have risked his safety for others, donated his emergency funds to save a family farm, or committed to rebuilding a community he initially planned to exploit. Those aren't small changes, Marcus. No, he agreed quietly. They're not. They walked in companionable silence until reaching the farmhouse where Emma had run ahead to greet her grandfather. Standing in the gathering dusk, Sarah turned to face Marcus directly. When all this started, I couldn't understand why someone with your skills would choose to help us, she said. Now I think perhaps you needed this fight as much as we did, just for different reasons. The insight struck uncomfortably close to truths Marcus was still struggling to articulate even to himself. His response was interrupted by Emma calling from the porch, announcing dinner with childish urgency. As they moved toward the warmly lit house, Marcus recognized that while his redemption remained incomplete, its foundation had been firmly established, not through dramatic gestures or public declarations, but through the accumulation of choices that gradually aligned his actions with the person he wanted to become, rather than the one his past had created. 1 year later, the wheat fields surrounding Millfield rippled gold under a September sun. Marcus stood at the edge of the Daniels farm, watching harvesters move methodically through the crop. Machinery purchased through the newly restructured Heartland Cooperative's equipment sharing program. So much had changed in 12 months. Vernon Stillwell and 3 board members had accepted plea agreements, providing testimony against Senator Harrington in exchange for reduced sentences. The senator himself awaited trial on multiple federal charges, his political career destroyed by the exposure of his role in Heartland's corruption. Most significantly, Heartland itself had been reborn. After the federal investigation confirmed systematic fraud, ownership had reverted to member farmers who elected a transparent board with strict oversight provisions. The cooperative had returned to its original mission, serving members rather than exploiting them. Admiring your handiwork? Sarah asked, joining him at the fence line. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her expression more relaxed than he'd seen during those tense months of evidence gathering and confrontation. Admiring the resilience of this community, Marcus corrected. I just provided some technical assistance. Sarah smiled at his characteristic deflection of credit. The cooperative's new financial transparency protocols are hardly technical assistance. Ellen says they're the most comprehensive she's seen in 40 years of bookkeeping. Marcus shrugged, still uncomfortable with praise for work that merely applied his knowledge of financial systems to protective rather than exploitative purposes. How are the harvest projections looking? Best yields in 5 years, Sarah reported with satisfaction. And with fair payment calculations, farmers will actually receive appropriate value for their crops. They walked together along the property line, a routine that had developed over the past year as Marcus gradually transitioned from guest to fixture at the Daniels farm. His role as financial advisor to the restructured cooperative had evolved into a permanent position, with responsibilities that drew on his expertise while establishing protections against the very vulnerabilities he once would have exploited. The Gundersons' loan restructuring was approved, Marcus noted as they walked. Their payment schedule is now aligned with realistic production timelines rather than designed to create default. Sarah nodded approval. And the Millers? Allison's agricultural education program launches next month. The cooperative board unanimously approved funding for the first 2 years. The program had been Allison's vision, teaching sustainable farming practices to a new generation, while documenting traditional knowledge from established farmers. It represented the community's commitment, not just to surviving, but evolving. The Minter Cooperative Audit Committee meets tomorrow. Marcus continued. I've prepared comprehensive transparency reports for their review. 3rd audit in a year, Sarah observed. Some might call that excessive. Some haven't seen how easily financial systems can be manipulated without proper oversight, Marcus countered. Trust requires verification, especially given Heartland's history. They reached the old oak tree by the pond where Emma's swing hung from a sturdy branch. The child herself was currently at school, another sign of how life had settled into new patterns after the tumultuous events of the previous year. "You received another job offer," Sarah said. Not really a question. Her network of connections kept her well informed about developments affecting their community. Marcus nodded. "An agricultural investment group in California. They were impressed by Heartland's restructuring model. Impressive compensation package?" "Very." The offer had included not just substantial salary but equity participation and relocation benefits. The kind of opportunity that would have been irresistible to the man who had arrived in Millfield a year earlier. Sarah studied him carefully. "Are you considering it?" "No." The decision had been surprisingly easy, requiring none of the deliberation such choices would once have demanded. "My work here isn't finished." What remained unspoken was the deeper truth, that his reasons for staying extended far beyond professional obligation. The community that had once been merely the backdrop for a sophisticated con had become home in ways Marcus had never experienced as an adult, and Sarah herself had become something he still struggled to define precisely. A relationship that had evolved gradually from suspicion to alliance to friendship to something more complex and meaningful. "Emma would miss you," Sarah said quietly, acknowledging the bond that had formed between Marcus and her daughter. "We all would." The simple statement carried weight beyond its words, an acknowledgement of his place in their lives that neither had directly addressed despite its growing significance. "I'm not going anywhere," Marcus assured her, meeting her gaze directly. "This is where I belong." They continued walking, circling back toward the farmhouse as afternoon shadows lengthened across the fields. The conversation shifted to practical matters. The upcoming cooperative meeting, the winter wheat planting schedule, community events being organized to celebrate the successful harvest. After dinner that evening, Marcus excused himself for what had become a monthly ritual. The drive to Cedar Rapids Cemetery took just under an hour, the route now familiar after multiple visits. His father's grave was modestly marked in the rural cemetery where generations of farming families rested. Marcus had located it shortly after deciding to remain in Millfield, making this pilgrimage part of his ongoing process of reconciliation with his past. "The co-op distributed its first profit-sharing payments today," Marcus said quietly, standing before the simple headstone. "The system works the way it was always supposed to. Fair calculations, transparent accounting, actual cooperation." Speaking to his father's memory had initially felt awkward, then gradually became therapeutic, a way of processing the connections between his past and present that continued to shape his evolving identity. "I think you would have appreciated the irony," he continued. "Your son, who spent 15 years exploiting corrupt systems, now designing protections against exactly the kind of fraud that destroyed our family." The evening breeze stirred the cemetery's maple trees, their leaves beginning to show hints of autumn color. "I used to think your greatest legacy to me was the lesson that honest work doesn't protect you from predators," Marcus admitted. "It took me 20 years to realize you also taught me the value of building something meaningful, something that outlasts individual gain." After a respectful silence, Marcus placed a small stone on the headstone, a Jewish tradition he'd adopted despite having no religious affiliation, appreciating its simple symbolism of remembrance. Returning to Millfield after sunset, Marcus noted the lights of farmhouses scattered across the darkening landscape, each representing families who had nearly lost their livelihoods and heritage to Heartland's corruption. The satisfaction of seeing them secure was unlike anything he'd experienced in his previous career. The Daniels farmhouse glowed with warm light as he pulled into the driveway. Through the kitchen window, he could see Sarah helping Emma with homework at the table, James reading in his favorite chair nearby, a tableau of family life that would once have seemed foreign and irrelevant to his interests. Now it represented a possibility he was slowly allowing himself to consider, belonging not just to a community or cause, but to people who mattered beyond strategic calculation. Emma spotted his arrival first, waving enthusiastically through the window before running to meet him at the door. "Mr. Marcus, I got an A on my math test." "Congratulations," he responded, her excitement infectious. "I never doubted you would. Mom says we can have ice cream to celebrate," she continued, tugging him into the house. "You'll have some too, right?" "I wouldn't miss it," Marcus assured her, meeting Sarah's gaze across the room with quiet understanding. Later, after Emma had gone to bed and James had retired for the night, Marcus and Sarah sat on the porch swing that had become their habitual evening retreat. The September night was cool but not uncomfortable, stars brilliant above the open farmland. The Farmers Association in Harris County has requested our restructuring model, Sarah mentioned. They're facing similar issues with their cooperative. I can prepare documentation, Marcus offered. The transparency protocols are designed to be adaptable to different organizational structures. They've specifically asked if you would consult directly, Sarah clarified. Your reputation has spread beyond Millfield. Marcus considered this unexpected development. What kind of consultant would I be? The reformed con artist, specializing in cooperative protection? Why not? Sarah challenged gently. Your particular expertise comes from understanding exactly how these systems can be corrupted. That's knowledge most financial advisors don't have. The observation was accurate but incomplete. It's not just technical knowledge. It's understanding the human element, how corruption spreads through organizations, how people rationalize participation in fraudulent systems, how predators identify and exploit vulnerabilities. Exactly, Sarah agreed. That's precisely why your perspective is valuable beyond Millfield. You could help other communities protect themselves from becoming what Heartland was. The idea was simultaneously appealing and intimidating, using his skills not just for one community but as a broader form of restitution for his years of exploitation. I'll consider it, Marcus said finally. But Millfield remains my priority. Sarah's hand found his on the swing between them. A simple contact that had come to represent the evolving connection neither had rushed to define. Good, because we're not finished with you yet, Marcus Webb. The gentle teasing carried undertones of more serious meaning. Acknowledgement that whatever was developing between them remained a work in progress, much like Marcus's ongoing transformation as they sat together watching shooting stars trace ephemeral paths across the night sky. Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this improbable present. He had arrived in Millfield as a predator targeting what he perceived as deserving prey, only to discover that the true prey had been himself, isolated by his own cynicism, imprisoned by patterns of deception that had become reflexive rather than chosen. The con artist who had prided himself on independence had found unexpected liberation in commitment. The man who had built a career exploiting corrupt systems had discovered deeper satisfaction in helping rebuild a just one. The individual who had avoided emotional attachment as a tactical vulnerability had found strength in connections he once would have dismissed as liabilities. Redemption, Marcus had learned, wasn't a single dramatic act, but a continuous process of aligning actions with evolving values. The habits and instincts of 15 years couldn't be erased overnight, but they could be gradually redirected toward more constructive purposes. Penny, for your thoughts? Sarah asked, noticing his introspection. Marcus smiled, the expression more genuine than any he'd perfected for his previous performances. Just appreciating how different this harvest is from the one I first observed in Millfield. The crop? Or the man observing it? Sarah asked perceptively. Both, Marcus acknowledged, though I suspect the crop changed less dramatically. Sarah's answering smile held understanding of just how significant that transformation had been, from a calculating con artist targeting a corrupt system to a committed ally helping rebuild a community. There's something satisfying about a good harvest, she observed. Not just the crop itself but what it represents. Effort rewarded, faith justified, continuation made possible. Marcus recognized the metaphor applied to more than agriculture. His own personal harvest, the outcomes of choices made when confronted with unexpected moral complexity, had yielded results he never would have anticipated when he first arrived in Millfield with plans for a sophisticated financial con. To new harvests, he offered, the simple toast encompassing both the literal crops being gathered across Millfield and the less tangible but equally significant yields of trust rebuilt, justice restored, and possibilities created. To new harvests, Sarah agreed, her hand tightening slightly around his as they contemplated both the year completed and the future unfolding before them. A future neither could have imagined separately, but now seemed increasingly possible. Together. If this story touched your heart, comment below with your thoughts, like and subscribe to our channel, and share any similar stories of unexpected redemption you've experienced in your own life.